All right, Amy, we're live on the channel and on YouTube.
Okay, I'm going to wait another minute and then I'll call it to order. LaTanya is not on as a panelist, but is in the audience if we need her. All right, since it is 7:01, I am going to call the Swampscott School Committee meeting to order. We are in a regular session on Wednesday, the 13th of January, 7 p.m. This is a virtual meeting, as is obvious, in accordance to the executive order issued by Charlie Baker on March 12th, 2020, suspending certain provisions regarding the open meeting law, chapter 304, section 20. So I'm going to begin with community announcements, and honestly, anybody who, even if you're not usually on here with us, if you have any kind of an announcement that you'd like to make, I will just raise your hand and I'll call on you after I call on the school committee members. So Suzanne, why don't we start with you?
I don't have any announcement, but I want to thank the Learning Center at the high school, because I ordered Christmas cards from them and I didn't get them in time for this Christmas because we closed school early before Christmas, but they were awesome, and I hope they do that. I hope they do that again, and I think I might be the only person outside of interoffice mail that got them. So I think it would be so great if the greater community got to see them. They were adorable Christmas cards. They're really nice. I just shout out to them, and I hope they do it again. I have nothing, no announcement though.
All right, Ted?
I'll defer with the 26 panelists and the 61 attendees.
Karen?
Nothing tonight. I'm good.
John?
No announcements, Amy. Also, I'll yield my time back with the full agenda.
All right. Tabitha?
Hi. Based on a lot of things that have been happening in our country recently, I think it's really important that the schools in a classroom environment really take time to kind of talk about not politics, but the fact of things happening in our country, and really the school itself, I feel, could take a more strong stance in saying this is acceptable to have one's own beliefs and opinions and political values, but it's another thing to, be support something like insurrection against one's nation. And I understand that as a space, school is a special place where people are supposed to be learning how to think for themselves and receive an education that isn't biased, or everyone can feel safe. But at the same time, I would love to see in the school stronger message, really, that this is right and wrong, because as students, we're really impressionable, and I think that just needs to be more strongly focused in our education, instead of when things happen in our country, it's not ignored and pushed with people's home life. Talk about we should be talking about these things in school, basically.
Did you find that did any of your classes talk about it?
Well, it was really left up to the discretion of the teachers, so that really depends on who you have as teachers as a student, and that's not things students have control over. Mm-hmm. And not all my classes talked about it. Some mentioned it, some had short discussions, but it was really left up to the discretion of an individual. And I think as a public system, that schools should be saying these conversations are absolutely necessary and really shouldn't be left up to chance if you have a teacher that wants to talk about it or not,
Okay. I'm scanning and looking for Myra. There you are. I'm Myra.
Hi, I'm also gonna go based off of what Tabitha was saying. I feel like a lot of the teachers are kind of not saying nervous, but are kind of afraid to approach the topic because they don't want the students to think that they're choosing sides between Trump and Biden. So I feel like if a lot more teachers were able to have a ground for everyone to start putting their own opinions in like a healthy way that's not deteriorating someone personally, then I think that's a good thing that our schools should have, because I've only had one class that really went over what happened and the other classes didn't talk about it at all. And I would just really want to see more people talking about it and not just like pushing it under the rug and everything.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on our panel? Would anybody else like to add anything tonight? Anything in particular that's happening that they want the community to know about? No. All right. Okay, so then for a couple of things for me in my community announcements. I do want to say I was really disappointed to see some of the events that happened over the holidays that impacted return to learning. I understand that kids are kids, but it just, we've got such a terrible balance of people who need to get back to school and to hear that because of some poor choices that we've got to stay remote longer than anticipated just really hurts. And it with all the work that all of our educators are doing to get our kids back in the building, it's really disappointing. I didn't want to not mention that. And along those lines, I have heard some stories from some of our health department at our school. And I'm just stunned to hear stories about sick parents sending kids to school. It is so completely disrespectful to our community, and particularly our teachers. I think that it's sort of easy at this point for parents to say, well, my kid's not really getting sick. But, with having our educators in the building and seeing kids coming to school from sick homes is really just unconscionable. And I could not say something tonight. It's like all of the work that this crew that's sitting before us has put out there, to have somebody so flagrantly disregard that is just really disappointing. So I couldn't not mention that. Before we dive into the superintendent's report, I do want to make a brief statement, particularly as it relates to a public letter, an open letter that was submitted to us by Mr. Eric Schneider, a Stanley parent on Puritan Road. There will be a fair amount that is spoken about tonight as it relates to that. But sort of broadly, I wanted to say that, it's now been 10 months that this pandemic has been going on. And certainly back on March 13th of last year, we did not imagine that this is where we were going to be. And we find ourselves, all of us here, and ultimately wanting the same thing, the students and the teachers in the classroom all day, every day. Because that's the environment that works best for teaching and learning. And there's no doubt about that. This big experiment that we've been having has been okay, but it's not ideal. So we understand that the desire for as much in-person and live instruction as possible, and that topic is going to be discussed at length tonight. Oh no, am I still on?
Yeah.
Sorry, something happened on my computer. So we respect the effort that Mr. Schneider and others have put into questioning and criticizing the steps that we've taken so far. And we just want to assure you that we are listening. We are giving all of the feedback the consideration that it deserves. In fairness, however, please don't confuse our failing to adopt any particular recommendation with ignoring it. We have a leadership team and professional staff led by an eminently capable superintendent that continues to work tirelessly to provide our students with the absolute best possible education experience under the circumstances. And these are three really important words: that can't be dismissed, which is under the circumstances. And you might disagree with the execution, but we feel strongly that the effort and the constant attention to moving forward is exactly what we need. It's important to realize that every school district is facing challenges that are peculiar to that district, and it's reasonable to assume that the issues that we're dealing with, or is it reasonable to assume that what we're dealing with is closer in scope to Marblehead than Lynn, Salem versus Wenham? We don't know. I mean, it's certainly easy to look around and point to other districts and see what they're doing and say, well, why aren't we doing that? But I think that we have to avoid the trap of thinking that there is one solution or one size fits all to this, which is has not been helped by the Department of Education, who has left us to our own devices. The members of this committee, the superintendent and her leadership team, are all keenly aware of the emotional and physical toll that we're all feeling after 10 months of COVID. We understand that people have gotten sick. As of Monday, 13 of our residents have died. Others have suffered economic impact of losing their job. We've sacrificed the ability to gather with family and friends, which is especially difficult during the holiday season. And in addition to the educational impact felt by our students, they have lost so many social, athletic, and other extracurricular experiences. Simply put, I think that we're all just tired of COVID and desperate for a return to normalcy. But, we've got to keep our eyes at what we're doing. This doesn't in any way diminish our resolve to do right by our students and teachers, and we're going to continue to rely on those charged with running our district to make thoughtful and informed decisions that are based on the best practices within the confines of what we can and can't reasonably expect to accomplish under the limitations due to COVID protocols under the circumstances. So I appreciate your support and understanding. There is going to be a public comment period at the end of tonight's agenda. Because of length, you'll see that this is going to be a long running meeting. I'm going to hold it to a 3-minute limit for anybody who's wishing to speak. And so in order to be respectful to all of our community, I ask that if you do speak, that you stick to that. So with that, Superintendent, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I would first like to recognize some teachers we have on our panel tonight. We have members of the Swampscott Education Association Union Executive Board. We have, when I call your name, if you could give us a wave. We have Rebecca Buckland, president of the union and second grade teacher at Hadley. We have Lynn Cronus from Stanley. We have Sue Comparato at the high school. Margaret Ardman at the middle school, Tom Reed from the high school, and I think, unless I'm on a second page, who am I missing? Wave if I've missed you.
Miss Ogumbona.
Oh, well, she's on my leadership team.
Oh, sorry.
Miss Ogumbona, and my leadership team is here as well. You'll see that they've added their tagline of principal, and Miss Ogumbona is going to be presenting something to the committee tonight as well. So I'm going to dive right into my superintendent's report if somebody wants to bring that up, but I am going to start with a facilities update with Mr. Casper, our director of facilities. He just wants to update on the ventilation report. This actually is a different document, Mrs. Wright.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, stop sharing. It's just,
Right.
I'll just go through my document, which will be available to everybody. So in particular, Mr. Casper was going to update the ventilation project over at Stanley School with the 8 classrooms. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Casper.
Thank you, Superintendent. Appreciate the introduction. Just wanted to give a brief update on the status of the ventilation project at Stanley specifically. Stanley was a bit of the old building at Stanley was a bit of an outlier in the survey, and the only large section of a building that has been shut down essentially for a significant period of time. So I have some good news to report on that front. Finally, we have 100% design complete for the ventilation replacement project at Stanley. It really is a different animal that we're dealing with over there, where across the district we've been managing a lot of old existing equipment that we needed to kind of get up and going and check on its capabilities. At Stanley, we had a void in a portion of the ventilation that we needed a full repair, and it's really a capital project that it's going to take to make that repair. So we've had a mechanical engineer and an architect working on this now for a while, and as I stated before, there's 100% design complete that we have prepared the invitation to bid, and we can say that it is actually out to bid as of today. Martha Seibert has been really incredible in pushing the procurement effort to get all the paperwork in order. And there's a lot to putting a project out to bid in the public sector that if you're not in the public sector, you wouldn't even get the full picture of it. It's not just find a contractor and get going. There's really a lot of steps to compliance. And Martha's been really great working to get that there. So we have the design 100%, and the project's out to bid. And then over the course of the next few weeks, there will be a bidding process where people review the bids. There's a site meeting on site with potential bidders, and then there's a formal bidding opening that will take place. And the design is really smart. I'm very happy with the technical components of it. I think they really did a nice job of working with some of the existing pieces that we have over there to integrate a system that is not so massive that it is startling to us from a financial and scope perspective. And I think it's really going to be a pretty manageable project. And for a long time, there was not a lot of clarity as to just how big of a project we could potentially be looking at that to essentially put a new ventilation system into an entire half of a building. So we are really pleased with the design and how it incorporates some efficiencies with some of the things that we do have, some of the very old things, and hopefully it'll allow us to have both a reasonably priced project and a timeline that will very likely put students back in those space before the end of this school year. So I don't want to get ahead of making any promises, exact dates, but the timeline is coming into focus, and I do think that by April we should be expecting to be making plans to moving back into Stanley. So that's really good news. It gives us some added flexibility with the spaces, and the spaces are a real challenge with four pretty old buildings out of our five. So it's definitely good news on the horizon on the Stanley ventilation front. So I'm happy to report that.
Thank you, Max. I really do want to shout out to both Mr. Casper and Ms. Seibert on this, because they took it on, they got on it right away. We knew that we hoped we would be doing this, but to have it already out to bid and have the timeline becoming clearer for this school year is really something we had hoped for, but it seems to be becoming a reality. So that's good news all around. Thanks for your work on this. The second item on my superintendent's report is pool testing. We've heard a lot about pool testing, and I'm going to throw it to our occupational health nurse, Amanda Mulcahy.
Superintendent, can I interrupt for 1 minute? I see Mr. Delano's hand raised. Was that in regards to facilities?
Yes.
If we can jump in there first.
Sure.
Just a quick question, Max. Thank you, and thank you to Martha. On a number, and I understand on the capital aspect of things, but is there a ballpark number that the community can be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, there's a public document that is now on the central register that estimates the project at $120,000. So we don't know exactly where it'll come in, but we've had a pretty strong estimate by the design team that's pretty confident it'll come in that range. So.
I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that Max and Ms. Seibert have gone through the old capital articles that exist for the school department, and that we will be looking to absorb that project within those tailings and those capital articles. So it's not like we'll be going to the town for more money for this. They really spent a lot of time doing a deep dive and finding out any kinds of tailings and how we could cover this project. So I think that's news that the community also needs to know, that we're looking to manage the finances for this project internally.
Thank you.
I can't imagine there's a lot of tailings hanging around, but if there are, and can we prioritize anything else with getting another project done, the next project?
We're looking at everything very carefully.
Okay.
And I'm working with the town administrator on this as well.
Thank you.
And so now I want to throw it to, I asked Mrs. Mulcahy to attend a webinar on pool testing, because we know that there are districts that are doing that, and we are in the very preliminary stages. And I just wanted Mrs. Mulcahy to share with you and the committee what she found out at a webinar and what we're considering and what are the pros and cons of doing pool testing within our district.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. And I just want to thank you, Ms. O'Connor, for also mentioning that, you know, sending your children to school sick is like a really big risk. We've had to send a couple students home already this week, and please keep your children home if they're sick. They're going to be sent home anyways. Please, it takes a dual effort between the school department and you guys at home to, you know, make this year successful. But on to pool testing. So the other day I was sat in on the seminar from DESE in regards to pool testing. Pool testing is where you take about 10 to 25 individuals, PCR test, which is like an anterior swab, which is not the one that touches your brain. It's very gentle. It all goes into one vial, and then that whole vial gets tested for COVID. To sum it up, if that one test comes back negative, then it is assumed that everybody that was tested in that vial, that pool of testing, would be considered negative. If positive, then what would happen is you would have to have follow-up testing, PCR testing, or antigen. DESE's recommending antigen testing for the backup. Would all have to be individually tested again to then determine who was the actual positive case in that batch. So DESE is rolling this out. They would like to see this be rolled out surprisingly at the end of January into February. They are offering the first 6 weeks to financially pay for this. Salem, Watertown, Medford were on this seminar, and they gave out some really good information. This would not be an easy undertaking. It's a lot of work, a lot of contact tracing, a lot of resources. And however, they felt it was beneficial. Salem was able to determine that, let me just pull up their results, sorry. So they were able to say that they had a percent positivity rate of 1.7 inside of the school, where their city was 7%. So, you know, that was a good data point to think about. Also, Watertown talked about how they tested over 6,000 tests, and they came back with a percent positivity of 2.1 in their school. And out of that 6,000, that consisted of 384 pool testing, and 9 of those came back positive at a percent positivity rate of 0.33. So the data that they're taking from this is beneficial. Salem felt that they could bring in more students. However, they had the ability and the space to bring those students in. Like I did say, that after that 6 weeks, it would be up to the school department to financially fund the testing. Right now, DESE has targeted it at $5 per individual for the pool testing. However, that follow-up PCR test, we know, can range from anywhere of $25 and on, depending on the contract that you would sign through. I just found out today from Watertown, they were really helpful. They gave me some more information, because one of the questions I asked is, how much is this going to cost for the school department? That's a big question. And Watertown just today released to me, which I really appreciate, that they spend on an average about 20 to 30,000 a week on testing for their facility. So I was very surprised. I don't know how many students, I don't know how many tests, how that all breaks down, but that's a large number to consider. And, I'm waiting for more information. We won't get the information from DESE and their state contracts until probably next week or the week after, to really be able to look at this and see if this is something financially we can do. But it is very intriguing. I think it has a lot of pros and a lot of cons, but it's something that we filled out the application as of right now for undecided. So.
Can I ask a question? Is this the Ginkgo Labs, the pool testing that we talked about a couple of meetings ago with Salem?
Yeah, so they do, right now they're doing also like a spit one. So this would be a PCR test. So it'd be a nasal swab, which is, DPH was actually on the DESE seminar, which I wish they spoke a little bit more. They didn't. But, they really think that this is beneficial to help. It's an extra it's an extra added on mitigation to help keep the schools protected. However, they also said that social distancing and mask wearing and hand hygiene are the top three. So
the Ginkgo labs over in, they're from the Seaport that they did in Salem. They had a lot of information that was out there. Maybe down the road, we can ask Salem if we could maybe partner up with them, because I'm sure the more the merrier.
yeah, they actually, that's definitely something that we can look into. They really are pushing BioNex for their testing and lab facility is what they really were advertising as the way to go. But like I said, it really comes down to what those contracts of, are available per the state.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just wanted to say one more thing, going back to students coming in and out of school, being sick. Once again, please don't send your children in sick. And also, we've made it really easy to call your children out in COVID status. So please, if you go to the Swampscott website, you can put in, you can go to the Family Student COVID-19 Self-Disclosure Form, fill that out, keep your children home. The school nurse will contact you. It's a partnership if we're going to get through this school, this school session. We really need your help in keeping the schools open. So.
Has there been any talk, I would assume the answer is yes, but what kind of talk are we having around having daily attestation in the same way that when the teachers come into school, they fill out a form? Is it possible that we can be asking for the same thing from students?
We talked a little bit about this yesterday. We did talk about, after you and I talked about it, Mrs. O'Connor, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, and we're going to explore that. One of the other things I'd like to not totally deviate, but to piggyback on this is that, it's also really important that parents remind their students that their expectation is when they're on school grounds. Actually, it's school committee policy. When you're on school grounds, even in the parking lot into the school, you need to wear your mask. And I was witness to a situation yesterday where there were several students that were asked 3 times to keep their mask on, and they didn't. And we are going to send students home if they don't comply with the school district policy and the school committee policy. So in addition to not sending your children in if they're sick, please remind them that we're all wearing masks from the moment we get out of the car in the parking lot and into the buildings. When there's a common area, you are expected to wear masks, and there will be several reminders, and then we will send students home. And I don't want to do that. We want more students in school, but they also have to comply with school committee policy. So I would just add that.
I just want to say it flies in the face of everything that I'm hearing the community say when they talk about, we love our teachers, we love our teachers. And frankly, sending your kids to school when you're from a sick family, or if the kid is positive, but they're, asymptomatic or not wearing masks, could not be more disrespectful to the teachers. So I I'm not going to mince words there.
I have a question about the pool testing. Are we looking at other things too? Like if kids are coming to school sick, do we have a way for the teachers to do like a by-next test or one of those antigen tests where you get the results in 15 minutes so we can know, for sure if the kid is sick, automatically we can isolate the other kids in the class and send that home, or like it sort of puts the data in our hands right away?
So this is something that I was actually going to bring up at the next meeting is other opportunities to bring that type of resource into the school. Now, there's also like legality issues of like consent forms and standing orders for our nurses. So, it is a lot difficult, or not difficult, but it's also like who's going to run the testing. So there's a lot that goes into it. However, I do think it's a good idea. And after speaking with Gargi with Lynn Community Health, she brought up some really good ideas, and it's something that we can look into. However, it
doesn't seem, the legality doesn't seem any different than pool testing. If you're going to test kids in school, you're going to test kids in school. But I just feel like, it covers us in a way, right away. We can know if a kid tests positive or negative right away and react with the other people in the classroom or any close contacts. And then we're not dependent on families. Like, did they go to the doctor? Did they get a test? Do we have the right information? We sort of controlled that a little bit better. It could be in addition to the pool testing, but I don't see us paying for the pool testing beyond 6 weeks with those kind of prices. And I know the antigen testing is so much more inexpensive. I also know there's issues with false negatives and things like that, but I think that it's just another level of safety or our controlling things.
Yeah, it's something that we can definitely look into and brainstorm. But it's something that also we would have to either partnership with a lab or then possibly run the sample ourselves. And
you don't run a sample at all. You just swab a card and it in 15 minutes. Like you don't send anything or don't run any samples. That's why I'm saying it's so fast. It takes between 10 and 15 minutes to get a result, and you literally do it on a card, and it's really inexpensive. And I just think it's something to investigate, because
we can definitely look into it and I can try to get more information on it.
Yeah, it's easy to get a standing order from Dr. D'Souza, like I'm sure, but just curious that I just think it's something else to look at that seems a lot easier to roll out than pool testing and figuring out, are you doing it? Who's getting pool tested and how often, and the expensive.
I think we're exploring all our options at this point. I requested that Amanda go to and attend the seminar just to hear what was offered, but we do know there are other options.
Yeah, I keep seeing it on the news. I keep seeing the districts that are taking advantage of that 6-week thing. So, it's very topical, but I just question it too. Like the expense is crazy.
There are other things to do with that $20,000-$30,000 a week. They're just other priorities.
Yes,
so we will continue.
But if Desi's paying for that,
what?
So Desi would only pay the 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
And then, but you have to remember, like 6 weeks also goes into like February vacation, and like if they're talking about it starting at late December into early February, it's just another thing to consider is the time frame of the 6 weeks too.
it just seems like it's sort of like the height of flu season. And so why not take advantage of it? But I know that's easier said than done. But it just seems like we should be grabbing all the opportunities that we can.
We will. We'll continue to explore them, but just bringing it to the committee since it just occurred, yesterday. So thank you, Mrs. Mulcahy.
Thanks.
The other update I have is winter athletics. Happy to report that they began practicing on January 6th. The first game is scheduled for the 16th, and the season will wrap up on February 20th. Home basketball games will be live streamed by our media department, and home ice hockey games will be live streamed on livebarn.com. Links will be posted on the athletics website. It was really nice to walk to my car this afternoon and see the hockey team on the tennis court practicing drills. And the kids were attentive and engaged, and it really made my heart soar. A reminder that there'll be no spectators at any athletic events this winter. The season's going well, despite things looking different. And the MIAA will be issuing information about Fall 2 season, which includes indoor track, volleyball, football, and fall cheer. This information should be available the first week of February. So stay tuned for that. That is the latest on the winter athletics season. And now I'd like to get into an open letter from our parents and my presentation with my team and addressing lots of questions. Suzanne, are you able to share that now? So are you able to enlarge the slides, or there's usually a plus on the right?
Yeah, no, I see it. That's this.
Just so we can see once, that's perfect. So if you could go to the second slide where we start a timeline. I wanted to provide the school committee and the community at large a timeline of things that occurred. Some of this I shared with the school committee via email prior to the holidays, but I wanted to revisit it for anyone that might be attending this meeting that hadn't heard it before. So in mid-November, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education had a data collection that needed to be submitted by districts. It was around structured learning time, or what will be referred to as SLT. At the school committee meeting on November 18th, and portions were repeated on the December 9th meeting, I talked about the fact that I had originally thought we would be moving to a 3-2 model following Thanksgiving. But at that time, we decided to stay the course because there were only 23 school days between Thanksgiving and the end of the school year. At that time, we talked about January being when our mid-year assessments were given, and if changes were going to be made, we really wanted it to be with data behind it. Next slide, please. Keep going. Thank you. Also at that meeting, I talked about what we were going to do until the time of the mid-year assessments. We were going to look at the capacity in each classroom and bring in high needs kids on more days to give more in-person instruction, more in-person time for students that were really struggling with remote learning, and identify students that were not meeting academic progress. I can say, for example, at the middle school, there were 42 students contacted to come in as we were looking at the capacity. And I think we had 38 students take advantage of that. So in addition to the cohorts A and B, they discovered there was more capacity to bring more students in, and 38 more students came in. We were working toward extending the school day for high need students into the afternoon. At that time, we have since gone back to our December 14th model and taken out lunches because of the surge and the recent surge. We were also going to add interventions, tutoring, guidance, check-ins for mental health. And at that time, we said that we would be looking at our mid-year data assessments to decide if the gaps were closing for most students. If they were, then we would continue in a hybrid model. If they weren't, then we would need to do a radical reorganization to prioritize in-person learning for students that were struggling. At that meeting, Mr. Giantis asked me if we were going to wait till January to come up with a plan. And at that time, I shared that both teachers and administrators would get together and start working on that plan immediately. So the goal of that committee was going to be to talk about, if we did not see closing gaps for kids, how we might change our model in order to meet those needs. Next slide, please. So our first meeting of this committee in collaboration was on December 1st. It just so happened that our second meeting of that committee was on December 9th. At the time, we had a call with the commissioner. And the purpose of his call with superintendents and school leaders was he wanted to share with us what was coming. He talked about the fact that collecting the data for the structured learning time was not meant to be an I gotcha. He made it very clear at that time that the department understood that every district was doing the best they could within their safety guidelines in managing their unique issues and challenges. What the structured learning time regulation was, why it was coming about, was because of the significant mental health cases and hospitalizations they were seeing. So for example, there was a 24% increase in student ages 5 through 11 of mental health cases and hospitalizations. And there was a 31% increase in mental health cases and hospitalizations for students ages 12 to 17. Next slide, please. On December 11th, we were notified that our district did not meet the new requirement, and we had until January 19th to make adjustments. On December 15th, Dr. Baker attended an informational webinar to review the new SLT requirements. And just for the committee's knowledge, our Phase 5 committee, which we dubbed a Phase 5 committee to follow Phase 4, met on December 1st, December 9th, December 16th, and December 22nd. The mission and the goals of the Phase 5 committee changed as a result of the December 9th call with the commissioner. We shifted the direction of this committee from trying to figure out what we would do after the mid-year assessments to make changes to meet the anticipated structured learning time guidelines. So that focus of that group shifted. And the reason it was called Phase 5 committee is because we had done Phase 4 work and it just morphed right into Phase 5. Next slide, please. So we received a letter from the elementary school parents, and that title also is a link to the letter for anyone who would like to take a look at it, who hasn't seen it. But it is linked in at the top of the slide. There's a couple of baseline pieces of information that I'd just like to share with everyone. The first is that pre-pandemic, our elementary school day was shorter than middle and high school. A typical elementary school day is 6 hours as compared to 6 hours and 20 minutes at the middle and high school levels. It's a difference of 100 minutes or an hour, 1.7 hours per week. It's not unusual for younger students to have less time in school. I also want to be very clear that administrators, faculty, and staff all share the desire to increase synchronous and more in-person instruction for our elementary learners. And finally on this slide, there's another link to a document that has questions asked by parents, and we've put answers into that document. And again, when we share out and put on the website this presentation, you can access that document through the link. We acknowledge that the challenges remote learning presents for our elementary students and families, and we understand it's more difficult than it is for our middle and high school students who are able to work more independently. On a very personal note, I would like to share that my daughter is 18. When she was in kindergarten, I was the principal of Stanley School. In the last 10 months, I've thought often about how I would lead an elementary school as a single mother while managing her schooling during this pandemic and with our models. The challenges would be daunting. At the same time, because she's 18, I have experienced the other end of the spectrum. She lost out on her senior year. No prom, no traditional senior week activities, and a modified high school graduation. I saw depression, anxiety, loss of motivation, isolation caused by a loss of interest in friendships with no in-person connections, all of this contributing to physical issues that were followed by numerous medical and therapy appointments. Her freshman year at college has not been as expected either, with remote classes. These are one-time events and experiences she will never get back, as she so often reminds me. So I can relate, and I empathize with all parents, K to 12, who have both our youngest and our oldest learners and who are trying to navigate this pandemic with their children. I don't plan to go through the letter we received point by point. Some of the answers to the questions can be found in the Google document linked in the slide. Suffice it to say, there are some very valid points and some claims that are simply not accurate. I'll respond to some of the main assertions, offering explanations that I hope will provide some context for the decisions we've made to this point. I would like to address the notion that was in the letter that Swampscott Public Schools misrepresented the quantity and quality of elementary live instruction. On November 3rd, we were offering 11.3 hours per week, which in our DESE report rounded per their instructions to the nearest half hour. The 13.3 hours reported in the SLT plan is simply a typo. It has been corrected. I'm disappointed by the insinuation. We're all working incredibly long hours at a frenetic pace, and simple mistakes can be made. The other point that I would like to address is the daily synchronous specials with over 100 students on Zoom in multiple grades. These are optional Zooms. They're not mandatory and don't replace the curriculum delivery from the specialist teachers that is delivered asynchronously in our current model. These large Zooms are opportunities for our students to connect with other students, maintain a connection with their specialist teachers, and to provide some social emotional support. So the first question that the parents were asking is, why is it acceptable for elementary students to access live instruction, to access less live instruction than middle school or high school students, despite research that shows K-8 students have experienced significant learning loss during COVID-19? Less live instruction for elementary students has been the practice in Swampscott and most districts for many years, and that is what I spoke to in terms of the 6 hours versus the 6 hours and 20 minutes. While there have been missed learning opportunities, which was presented to the school committee on November 4th, we have been already pursuing and implementing several strategies to try to close those gaps. More small group instruction, tutoring, enhanced assessment and data used to target instruction, and increased in-person time for highest needs students. We will be evaluating the impact of these interventions over the next few weeks and may once again adjust our instructional models for phase 5 if we don't see significant improvements. That was the original plan of the committee that got together following Thanksgiving, and then our direction had to change as a result of the Board of Education's vote. The other point I'd like to make on that slide, is that pre-pandemic, with a 6-hour elementary normal day, time was built in for play, for exploration, for socialization, unlike our current state with just formal lessons. So the intensity of the live synchronous Zooms and in-person learning is very, very different without that fluff built into their day. Why did SPS provide less instruction than 97% of the districts in Massachusetts? We provided as much live instruction as we were able to, given the various facilities and staffing constraints and philosophical decisions that we made to balance the needs of all our K-12 students. The data is only as good as the district self-reports. We were honest in our report to DESE and conservative in our calculations. There was considerable room for interpretations in November's reporting guidelines. Our primary focus has been on the quality of our instruction in this new learning environment. I also want to note on this slide that when we talk about facilities and staffing constraints and philosophical decisions, I want to point out and remind the community that our school committee voted to follow the CDC guidance of 6 feet. In addition to that, we went out and pursued, with the leadership of Mr. Casper, a ventilation report on our schools. We had a thorough ventilation report and study done that was presented here with floor plans. The result of those studies determined that our average maximum capacity in our classrooms is 11 bodies, which includes students and instructional staff. In addition to that, we've maintained, in some cases, stricter health guidelines than other districts. And again, in some cases, stricter than DPH in order to keep our schools open in some capacity. The next point I want to make, I don't want to insult anyone, but it's a fact that I can't ignore when we talk about facilities issues. In 2014, we had a failed vote for a new elementary school. With 275 core projects with the MSBA throughout the Commonwealth, less than 16 projects failed by either a no vote or for some other reason. Swampscott was one of those no votes. If that vote passed in 2014, this district would not be faced with the elementary challenges that it's faced with right now. And I think it's important to note that less than 16 out of 275. And some of those 16 never even pursued it. They weren't no votes. So the amount of no votes across the Commonwealth out of those 275 is much smaller. And I think that's important to note. What have other districts done differently that enabled them to provide comparatively more live instruction? Each district has a unique set of constraints and facilities, staffing, and staff and district readiness. Districts with new school buildings faced fewer facility challenges that limited the number of students who could be in person at any given time. And different districts have made different philosophical decisions about what is best for their students. I want to remind the committee and the community that part of the challenge of this whole pandemic has been, we've been waiting for guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education since last spring. We were waiting for guidance from them before we reopened in the fall. And every time we went on a call, it was that information and guidance was coming, or decisions were going to be made to make districts unified across the Commonwealth. And at the 11th hour at every one of those calls, we were told it was a local decision and it was at the discretion of the local authorities. And so instead of receiving uniform guidance, there was a recognition that every district had a unique set of circumstances. And so in some ways, we were left to make our decisions that were best for our districts and our students. And in other ways, it really felt like we were left out there with no guidance. For example, Chelmsford, which was one of the featured districts, pointed out that they were a one-to-one district prior to the pandemic, which made it really easy for their staff and students to adapt to remote synchronous instruction than they would have if they hadn't been a one-to-one district. Our district was not a one-to-one district pre-pandemic. And so the learning curve for our district was much steeper than another district. Next slide, please. What constraints prevented Swampscott Public Schools from providing more live instruction in the fall as compared to the revised SLT plan to take effect January 19th? When were those constraints known and what steps were taken to resolve those constraints? On October 26th, our hybrid plan represented our best thinking at that time on what we could do given the constraints and what would be best for our students. I also want to point out here that we targeted that date of October 26th way back in early fall, end of August, beginning of September. We stuck to that date going hybrid, and I feel deeply that that should be something that's celebrated. We only went remote around the holidays because we couldn't control holiday gatherings or travel, but we stuck to that date. The things that have changed since then that have allowed us to increase live instruction for the January 19th model include the ventilation repairs and work that we've done. The work on our cabling infrastructure over winter break, growing teacher expertise on how to prepare and deliver instruction both synchronously and asynchronously, and changes in the federal laws regarding COVID-related leaves of absence that expired at the end of December. Stay on this slide, please, Suzanne. The other thing I'd like to point out is that our Director of Facilities, Max, joined us on June 10th. And without his leadership in terms of pursuing the ventilation reports, we would have been lost. And so it wasn't until June that he joined us. We knew last spring that teachers would need professional development and support to deliver instruction in our hybrid models. So we provided PD over the 10 days of pre-opening work in September and throughout the fall. We also hired an additional technology integration specialist to provide support. In terms of technology, for the past 4 years, we've slowly been improving our network piece by piece through the E-rate process, which provides federal funds to improve our internet access in school networks. These projects are often $30,000 to $100,000, and we depend on town capital to fund a portion. Last February and March, we applied for funding to improve our internal fiber connections. But due to the pandemic, there was a significant delay in the program, and we did not get approval until September. We tried to schedule with our vendor, but we experienced delays because of the shipment of their materials and due to the pandemic. This work was just completed this December during the holiday break. I think it's also important to note, like every district, we continue to learn. We learned lessons in the spring, which we applied to the reopening plans in the first hybrid plan. We learned lessons since October 26th that we're applying now. And our January mid-year assessment data will give us even more information to shape our phase 5 plan. The work continues every single day. We don't have a hybrid plan and then just go about our business. Every single day, we continue to have these discussions on how to improve. Next slide, please. Why is SPS unable to provide instructional equality between remote and hybrid students and cohorts? As reported by our educators and what we know developmentally, it's difficult for our youngest learners to attend Zoom for lengthy periods of time. Live Zooming into classrooms is not an effective strategy for young learners, yet we continue to explore this. And pre-pandemic, the only option the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education provided to districts for students that did not want to come into school was either homeschooling or online school options. Those are still available. But why did they do that? They did that because they knew the impossibility of districts having one staff to teach both hybrid models and remote models at the same time. So they offered options, homeschooling and online schooling. I'm going to stick on that slide for a minute. I want to just wrap my head around my thoughts. Both remote and hybrid models are different teaching modalities and should look different. We're working to try to provide more support for our elementary remote learners, hiring remote-only teachers. Why did we not do this earlier in the fall? Because the applicant pool for any school position was either small or non-existent. No one was jumping in for a school-based position in the fall. And it wasn't just in Swampscott. In the superintendent's listserv, there were numerous communications about, are you getting any applicants for a third grade teacher? Are you getting any applicants? And so the pool was quite small. We also couldn't assign one of our own grade level teachers because we explored that option because our classrooms couldn't absorb the hybrid students, even if we looked across the district. Because of those maximum occupancies of 11, if I took one second grade teacher out of that pool and then had her hybrid students try to fit into the other classes, even across the district, there was no extra capacity. And so we couldn't do that. So now we have posted for remote teachers for our elementary students. And it is our goal to hire teachers to teach our remote learners. And as of last night, I'm happy to report that we have a remote teacher for grade 1 students across the district. And across the district, those students were able to be absorbed into other first grade classrooms. And we have a remote teacher for all our first graders across the district. And you will be getting information about that for January 19th. But that just happened last night. We only have one staff to deliver both models. Time equity does not equal instructional equity. Student outcomes tell us whether there is instructional equity. Are our remote and hybrid students making equal progress? That's what we're looking to answer, the question we're looking to answer with our mid-year assessments in January. Next slide, please. So what's the plan for learning remediation in advance of fall 2021 reopening? How and when does the district plan to address the cumulative learning losses from March 2020 through June 2021? Our plan is to be offering an expanded summer learning program to address gaps in learning losses or learning opportunities. We are looking at a summer program to address those gaps, and whether this summer program is for 1 year or for 2 years remains to be seen. We've already been and will continue to utilize strategies for remediation, small group instruction, tutoring, enhanced assessment, and data used to target instruction, increased in-person time for highest need students, and we'll evaluate the impact of these interventions over the next few weeks and we might adjust our models. Next slide. Has SPS consulted with town council as the liability created by excluding students from the hybrid learning model via lottery? This was actually guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It was their recommended approach. Their other comment during a webinar or a conference call was, you might have to say there's not enough room. Will SPS commit to promptly revise its learning models to meaningfully increase the live instruction to elementary school students and provide equal quantities of live instruction to hybrid and remote elementary students? We will continue to re-examine and revise our model based on our mid-year assessments. Next slide. So my final or closing thoughts. It was mentioned about not fulfilling the mission of the Swampscott Public Schools. I want to say that we are fully committed to fulfilling the mission of the Swampscott Public Schools. Yes, to promote academic excellence for all our students by supporting teaching and learning. Prepare all our graduates for achieving success in college and career and citizenship. Build respectful and caring relationships among all members of the community, and develop and nurture culture of reflection, creativity, and commitment to continuous improvement. The difference is how and when we get there will continue to look differently as long as we are in the midst of a pandemic. I also want to say in my final thoughts, there are some things that we have on our side, and there are things that aren't on our side. So what do we look to have on our side? We have time to close educational opportunities and gaps of our youngest learners, the gift of time. We have talented and experienced educators at all levels who know the curriculum, their craft, and your children. They know the skills their students should know and be able to demonstrate at their grade level, and are assessing all their students' progress every single day. What is not on our side? The ability to adequately comfort those families and students who have lost parents, grandparents, a relative, a neighbor, or a friend to this virus. We don't have the ability to keep everyone safe and healthy all the time, 24 hours a day. We don't have the ability to comfort everyone if we lose a member of our district, whether it be student, faculty, or staff, due to COVID-19. I've already experienced this exact tragedy too many times in this district pre-pandemic, and I know what it does to our school community. And we don't have the gift of time for my oldest learners as they plan their future and decide their paths. That concludes my presentation.
School committee, I'm gonna look to you. I'm sure that there are questions. Superintendent, I have a few.
Can you stop sharing your screen so my team can pop up, please? Thank you.
I think the easiest one will be the easiest question is, where are you going to post those answers, that Google document?
So this presentation will be posted on the website, and within that document there are links.
And is it on the superintendent's page?
It will be on the superintendent's page, and it will also be in the blog that is shared out. So all of those links, and Dr. Bacon, has that document been shared out in other ways?
Yes, all parents, when they filled out the survey about their preference for hybrid or remote for the next period of time, they were given links in that email to both a place to post their questions and the place where we were going to put their answers. So every parent in Swampscott has in their email that went out about the survey links to the document with answers to the questions that they posed.
Oh, right. Right. Yes, I did see that. So it'll be a continuation of that then. Okay.
Yes.
Just maybe if we could reshare that out, maybe through each of the buildings, just so that it's fresh. So I have a couple of questions. My first is regarding the lottery. Is that complete?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Parents were asked to join a lottery if they wanted their kids to have more time. Have those decisions been made, or is that still being worked out?
Dr. Bacon?
Yeah, based on the results that the input or the choices that families have made so far, we do not believe a lottery is going to be necessary. We've actually had fewer families choose hybrid now than chose it on October 26th for October 26th. So we don't think that's going to be necessary.
That's good. In your report, Superintendent, you were talking, there was a line item about DESE with their homeschooling and online schooling. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I didn't follow that entirely. I think I know where you were going with it.
So pre-pandemic, if there were families that didn't want to send their students into the buildings or into school, they had two choices. And they're ongoing now. Homeschooling has always been an option, but that goes through Dr. Bacon's office, and there's an application process, and there's criteria, and there has to be evidence of meeting the standards. There's a whole process. So we do have some students, as we talked about before, that are homeschooled within our district. In addition to that, there is an online learning platform, TECCA, T-E-C-C-A, that if somebody wants to do a virtual online program, they're able to do that as well. So pre-pandemic, DESE acknowledged that it was difficult for one staff to be able to teach in person and to be able to teach those students that weren't coming in. And now we're in the middle of the pandemic, and that is why those two options are still available for families, and why teaching both remote and hybrid students has been such a challenge. We have been working on the idea of assigning remote teachers to our remote learners. But as I said before, we were posting positions and nobody was applying. And so now we're starting to get a little bit of movement. We have interviews going. I think people waited to see how districts were going to fare during the virus and fare and during the pandemic. And so now we have a little bit of progress. And I know those youngest learners, K1, 2, they need engagement. And it's more than just watching a screen by live streaming. And so I'm really excited. And it's actually a Stanley teacher who is taking on all of the first graders that are remote across the district. So that's great, great news.
So is TECCA an option that's available to any of our district, any kid in our district?
Yes.
Even now, like if I decided I wanted to pull my kid, I could put them in with the TECCA program.
You could, yes.
Okay.
Visit the website.
I did not know that. Thank you. I'm gonna call on my school committee members. I see Ted and John both have their hand raised. So Ted, you first, and then John.
And Suzanne's raising her hand.
Oh, Ted,
So,
John,
I'll go. Thank you, Superintendent. And I do not believe that out of all the panelists from your team and the other members of the community, know, I believe that everyone shares that we should be promoting academic excellence. A couple of points that I just wanted to try to clarify on the block 5, the question from Eric Schneider in regards to denying the students right to attend school and quoting that Mass General Law. That for me, the overall product that he sent to us, it does have some points in it that I can share as the concern. I want to make sure that that violation of Chapter 71 is not, in fact, going on. And I'd like to see maybe if town council could weigh in regards to making sure that we are adhering to that SLT new requirement. Can we do that?
Dr. Bacon?
Yeah, we're actually exceeding the requirements. As of January 19th, we will be exceeding the state's requirements for structured learning time at all grade levels, the average across, which is what we're expected to do.
And we're not violating MGL.
Okay.
We don't need council to tell us that.
Okay. I'd like to digest a little bit more on your presentation, but one thing that I would love for everyone, especially the school committee, to embrace as we go forward in the budget season, and I know the chair is aware of this, is I wholeheartedly support a robust learning time for some enrichment studies. And I would say that that's an opportunity for our 2,200 plus kids to try to make up the time. Now, in regards to Dr. Bacon and Martha Raymond said that, on average from that data, we were about 1.5 behind each child. And I think it's impossible for a kid to make up that time, but I do think that we should look forward in our budget process and have the best program that we can, whether it be after school, a Saturday, some summertime. I would not like to say it and have it titled as a summer school or something like that, because I think that for a child, it could be taken away as they're being penalized. They have not done anything wrong, but I think we should frame our upcoming budget discussions on programs K through 12 with opportunities, whether it be in person, if we can, or Zooming, to start to erode the time that they're behind. And I hope that
Mr. Delano, we're already doing that. Dr. Bacon, do you want to talk about Saturday? And we're not going to look at this summer. It's not going to be a punitive summer school. It is going to be a summer program that's targeted to close those gaps. But Dr. Bacon, do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on Saturdays already?
And also, Dr. Bacon, I know the data you presented in the fall, I know we always tend to focus on the students who have gaps to increase, but there was a large group of students who did not have gaps. And that's really important to know, that we have actually met learning requirements for many students in Swampscott, even during this pandemic.
So a couple of things that are going on now to try to close those gaps is there's a program at the high school that's been running. I think we're entering our 4th Saturday. We did a couple before break and we're continuing up at least through February break. It's allowing students who were behind on credits from last spring a way to make up those credits so they return to being on track for graduation. Right now it's focused on seniors. And I think this weekend we're starting to bring in juniors and sophomores to get them back on track with their credit. In addition, we started a very large tutoring program that is a combination of tutoring program that happens during the school day when students have free time, and also in the after school hours where students are working individually with a tutor for a variety of different circumstances, or in some cases, there are families who are struggling to have their students engage in remote or hybrid learning, and we've hired 2 case managers to work specifically with those families to see if we can help those students become effective learners during this pandemic. So we have all those programs going on at the moment. In addition to the normal kinds of things we do for students who may be lagging in their learning in regular time. So we have programs built into the school already, especially at the elementary level, for literacy and math extra support during their school day outside of the instruction they get from their classroom teacher.
That's great. Is the casework is K through 12?
Yes.
Okay. I still would like to see during budget discussions if we can supplement that program system-wide in regards to tutors.
I want to recognize you, Ms. Seibert, because I know it's probably not a question for the panel.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Bacon was talking about. Those programs that she outlined, those are grant funded. Those are coming out of CARES money and ESSER money. So all those, the incremental cost of running those programs, the boot camps and the tutoring and the academic support, they're all being funded by various federal grants.
And what about the new teacher hire that we just, for the remote learners? Is that also CARES money?
No, we're going to find that out of the operating budget.
Okay, I promised John, Mr. Jantis, you are up next.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you to the superintendent for that presentation. I found it very informative. I just had some clarifications based on what I was hearing. So what I heard was that, superintendent, there was you outlined facilities limitations, you outlined staffing limitations. I did not hear at this point in implementing your go forward plan that funding was a concern. And you didn't say it, but I just wanted to confirm that, funding is not a concern to implement your new plan and going forward for the remainder of the school year. That won't be a concern.
Not at this time. In fact, Ms. Seibert and I are, or Ms. Seibert has spent a lot of time sharing with me where we are at with the FY21 budget, and she's actually up on the agenda to give kind of a balcony overview of that. So we, as Mrs. O'Connor just said, we are hiring teachers without having it in our budget, but we are covering that. And so I know that we will be scheduling a committee of the whole budget discussion to get into those details, and that Ms. Seibert's going to give, like I said, an overview of where we're at for FY21, but that is not a concern. The staffing, keep in mind that we had those leaves that our staff was entitled to. And I'll go back to the meeting in the fall or the end of the summer where we had 75 staff requests, and there were a lot that were legitimate. And so that leave has ended. And so the staffing was a huge concern, and our facilities are a huge concern. And the facilities department has done yeoman's work, and we've had air purifiers put in spaces as an added layer of protection. And so those were the two major ones, Mr. Jantis.
Okay, thank you. And one of the other things you mentioned was the summer program. And is there any special eligibility for that? Like you need to be in a, not performing category? Is it going to be open to everybody?
At this point, our plan, and Dr. Bacon, you can chime in, is so we have our mid-year assessments in January, and they're ongoing now, and then we have end-of-year assessments. So it will be interesting to see what gaps we close with students between the January mid-year and the end-of-year assessments, and those might guide our decisions, but we are still refining what the criteria would be for those summer programs. Any child that has a gap in a skill, we're going to want to see, we're going to want to assist in closing those gaps. Right now, we're setting up the criteria though.
Okay. Yeah, and if I can just ask going forward, if, as those become more solidified, to bring those back to us, I think that would be great.
Sure.
Mr. Jantis too, I just want to make sure people aren't confusing that with the extended school year programming that our students with disabilities also attend. I would, while I do think we obviously want to offer a robust summer program for sure, especially with the good weather, it's a lot easier for us to provide mask breaks and be outside for outdoor learning, which I think the kids would really appreciate considering the constraints we're under even during the winter. I will say attendance tends to be weak, even in our extended school year programming at times. I think sometimes people come and sometimes they don't. And just from a budgetary standpoint, I just want people to know whether students attend or don't attend, the staff are paid. So the cost is incurred. So I think we have to be also cognizant of that piece about how many people would want, to be attending school in the summer as well.
I guess my point in all of that, and as the team discussed, a summer learning program, it is our job to prepare our students for to go off into the world and be contributing citizens. Whether that happens at the end of their second grade experience or it takes additional time, we're committed to getting there. That is our job. And so although it might not look the same as it's looked in years past, and the time frame is different, we're going to prepare our students. And so whatever that means in the fall, we don't know what September 2021 is going to look like. Does that mean that we continue to offer remediation in different models? We're continuing exploring those, but just know that this group before you tonight is committed to giving our students the skills they need before they graduate high school. And that is the message I'm trying to convey tonight.
Okay, and thank you, Superintendent. My last question was just around one of the items in your presentation around mental health cases and hospitalizations. And I read that as kind of an aggregate for Massachusetts, but I just wanted to confirm that wasn't specific to Swampscott.
Yes, it wasn't specific to Swampscott. It's actually the statistics the commissioner gave us, but we know anecdotally what we're seeing at our high school and middle school. And we're also aware of, the needs of our younger learners too. So, but that was a Commonwealth percentages.
Okay, and for what it's worth, I did appreciate your, the story you conveyed about your daughter and what she's been going through. And I know, just from folks I've talked to here in the district, I mean, it's fairly widespread and it's very concerning. So, I share that concern with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy.
Suzanne.
John addressed a couple things. I was going to ask about the statistic too, and just check in on our district that we're sort of seeing the same trend, hopefully not as bad. And I have the same struggles with students in my household too. So I appreciate that. I had a question about the Phase 5 team. Like, I know you've worked a lot with the SLT requirement, but are you shifting back to what if our scores aren't great in January? Like what the changes are going to be?
The discussions are ongoing. The team hasn't met again, but that doesn't mean we won't. And those assessments are going on now, and we do recognize that there may be another shift. So that committee the work can continue.
So are we thinking about auditing classes to see how many kids are actually showing up in them in the middle and the high school, for example? Because I know the numbers of kids returning to hybrid are decreasing. And I've just heard from people that their children are going to classes that have, 3-4 kids in them. And is there a way to maybe use smaller spaces for those classes and maybe use some of the larger spaces and try to get some more younger learners in places?
I think that's a great question. And it's one that we've explored. We, in fact, have considered having our high school students go remote. But for all of the reasons I laid out tonight, I'm not willing to do that. I am not going to place a higher value on one group of learners over the other. And so the thought was have those high school students go remote and utilize the high school for our elementary students. Here's the problem. We'd have to provide busing. By law, we are mandated to provide busing to the high school, and I don't have that in my budget. And so this week, and Mr. Kohat can chime in, I have called for those class sizes of in-person. We are taking a look at that. We're going to be looking at it beginning with the next model on the 19th. But I would look to Mr. Kohat or Mrs. Finn to chime in on that information.
Could I?
Yeah, I mean, regarding numbers of kids, it was certainly down in December from when we opened in October. And we'll have to see what the survey data looks like in terms of what people are choosing. But just in looking at the survey responses so far, there are definitely fewer people choosing the hybrid option this time around. Although that could mean that, in a future phase in the spring, maybe more people will be more open or more comfortable coming in hybrid if things progress in the way that the experts are kind of predicting with the vaccine and that sort of thing.
I was sort of thinking, even at the middle, just places like at the middle school, for example, if there's classrooms that are happening in hybrid that have, like people are telling me, 2 and 3 kids showing up at an English class instead of 9 or 10, there's an opportunity to use a smaller space and, use that building for a larger Stanley classroom or Hadley classroom, and then use the high school for a larger Clark classroom, because just the proximity, you probably won't have to bus those kids. I was just trying to see, like, if there was a way to think about what spaces. I mean, I think we can't think about this like we can't fit the pandemic into a traditional school model. So we have to just blow the school model up and just think way more fluidly about our students and our staff and our spaces.
Most of our classroom spaces are still 11 capacity.
I was just going to say that, Mrs. Wright.
We have one teacher. So I've got one teacher and that's it. So I can't, even if I could get a room, it's still, we've gone through every permutation to try to eke out more in-person instruction. And right now, the biggest thing we could do, which we did, is we looked at every single classroom where there were 11 students. And if there were 8 or if there were 7, then we would open that back up to the cohort A. If we had students that were really struggling in cohort A and we wanted them in 4 days, we gave them cohort B. So they came in now 4 days. We've done that. We're going to do it again because we have more kids who chose remote. Mr. Coates going to look and say, I can bring in more kids in 4 days now because some of the kids picked remote. The other issue we have right now is, and we had just started right after Thanksgiving when this surge occurred, where we were offering lunch and now having kids in full day. We are also not doing that. That's a large part of in-person instructional time that we don't have. We have offered, and we're very fortunate in Swampscott because we're so tiny in terms of our geographic distance, that we've allowed students to go home for lunch and then come back in to finish up their day. I don't have many students taking us up on that, but we have offered that, especially with students with disabilities. I'm extraordinarily hopeful that Swampscott is going to move out of the red shortly, and that we're looking a little bit better, and then we'll be able to bring back offering lunch in a safe manner, which I know we've worked very closely with Mrs. Mulcahy to help create up those safe protocols to do that. And that opens up a whole nother chunk of time for us to do. But we have looked at every way, and the constraint is the amount of people in a room and the amount of staff that we have. Like that, it's just matching that up.
I was going to say, I have before me a chart of the high school classrooms, all of them, 3 feet, 4.5, and 6 feet. The classroom capacity at 6 feet in the high school classrooms, a new building, 10, 13, 5, 12. It's not much more beyond the 11. So thank you, Mrs.
So I'm not asking to to question whether or not you guys are looking at this. I mean, I'm asking because I think that as great as we're doing, we can always do better, right?
Absolutely.
But I'm mostly asking because I know I saw those space summaries from that initial report, and I just think it's really important that people, I think it's important, you can't say this enough times, that you guys are looking at every single square inch of our spaces. And I think that's really important. And I think that it's really important that, you know, Mrs. Raymond, you're talking about, you know, taking extra kids and putting them in when cohorts are small. And I think that's really important, that flexibility and those shifts midstream are really important. And I don't think everyone understands that they're happening because they might not be happening to your kid.
Right.
You know,
and that's very true. Like, we really have to, you know, it's a triage that's happening.
That's exactly, that's
the date. We look at the data. We look, there are, I mean, I know we tend to focus on the difficulties that we're having, but there are kids who are doing well right now, amazingly, but they are, and they are receiving instruction. They are moving forward in the curriculum. And then there's a group that's not. And that's where our focus is really on, looking at them and how can I provide more in-person instruction, the caseworkers that Dr. Bacon has, how to help facilitate the remote learning. It is a real challenge. It's a challenge, but people are thinking of every single thing that they can do to meet this.
Can I ask about the teachers? Not so much the students, but are the teachers getting evaluated this year, or are people popping in and out of teaching lessons to make sure, you know, you hear about the class ending early or giving kids, you know, or breaking out and just working with one kid and the rest of the class is off. And I just keep hearing about inconsistencies with different teachers or different classrooms. And I think that if you have a situation with the child and the teacher, you know, doesn't seem to be on as much as, you know, your neighbor's kids' teacher seems to be. I just was wondering if there's a little check in those consistencies, or that kind of looking at the quality of the service delivery.
There's a whole bunch of people that can chime in here, but yes, teachers are being evaluated this year. I'll let the teachers chime in if they'd like to, and Dr. Bacon, if you'd like to, and the principals to chime in. Don't all raise your hand at once.
So one of the things we just started at our leadership meeting last week, because again, there's so much effort going into just keeping everything safe, keeping everything running, continually looking at all the issues and can we do better. That's kind of a daily grind that's, I think, taken a lot of people's attention, especially in the fall as we were getting used to all these new models. But we just started at leadership last week, having every grade span of administrator look at the expectations for teaching that we sent out to teachers in the fall, picking something, and this week or next week, we'll be bringing back data to the table to say, okay, you did a survey of your Google Classrooms or your teaching around this particular focus element. What did you find? Where are we strong? Where can we use some improvement? What do we need to improve? So that's work that we're not only doing collectively or individually in the teacher evaluation process, but work that we're doing collectively as an administrative team.
No, that's great to hear, because there's just so many other fires you're putting out at a, you know, whatever. All right. I mean, honestly, I think you're doing a great job, and I just appreciate everyone's flexibility and their commitment to this. And I just think it's so hard. It's so hard for, you know, me to understand with a certain age kid and not an elementary school kid or not a middle school kid. You know, it's so different at every single level and in every single classroom. Something, you know, it's just crazy. But thank you. Miss Buckland has her hand up.
Yes, I couldn't raise my hand. I can tell you that these teachers are working harder than they ever have before. Our day starts earlier. It ends later. We're giving 150% all the time. I can say I've been here for 20 years, and we are I can't even tell you how proud I am to work beside the people that I'm working beside and how hard we're working. So I know that I can speak for all of my colleagues when I say we are doing everything we can because we love these kids and we want to make every piece of learning as successful as it can be. So I just want to put that out there that I am extremely proud to be working alongside the teachers in this community and how hard that they work. So just wanted, that's my 2 cents.
Sarah has her hand up. Ms. Marshall has her hand up.
Thanks. So most of this further discussion sort of answered the questions I had, which were basically around capacity in the classrooms. And so I'm glad to hear that if there is room, that they're inviting more kids from the other cohorts in to fill that space. And then I was also going to ask about the possibility of going to 3 feet if the nation were to move in that direction, if the CDC and the state were to, you know, make that recommendation. But I mean, from what I'm hearing, it almost doesn't sound like that's even needed because it sounds like people are choosing remote at this point. And so, I don't know, I guess I'm just confused that people want more live instruction, more time with their teachers, and yet they're actually electing not to come back into the buildings. So, you know, at this point, if we were to investigate or try to move towards the 3 feet and understanding the ventilation issues, would it even help us at this point based on the results of the survey?
Yeah, it would help us.
It would still help us?
Yes, absolutely. I could get more kids in for sure.
Wait, so say that again. If we moved from 6 feet to 4.5 feet to 3 feet, that would be helpful.
In terms of getting more students into the classroom, in terms of maintaining safety, I don't know, right? I mean, you know, it's just a, you know, that's more a question for.
I see Amanda's face.
Yeah,
and probably, you know, as you know, I am no medical professional, but as I've said, I mean, anecdotally, we've seen all of our kids for the most part, sort of be able to ride out this wave, but I'm concerned about our teachers. I mean, you know,
we still have staff that are sick.
Yeah.
And getting sick. So, and I'm sorry, Amanda.
No, so I mean, ultimately, if we did drop down to the 3 feet, yeah, we could get more bodies potentially into the room. However, that's going to create more of a risk, right? We already know right now that with CTC involved, we're not getting test results and isolation guidance as quickly as we can.
CTC is who?
That's the Collaborative Community Tracing Center. So that the states basically gets involved and says you have to follow your isolation guidelines. You know, that's something that the health department was previously taking care of for our town. So yes, 3 feet would obviously get more people in, but that goes against DPH guidelines. And, you know, anybody who falls in the 3 feet is automatically a close contact. So it's the difference of shutting down whole classrooms right now, or if you maintain the 6 feet, people are still staying safe. It's safe for the teachers, it's safe for the children. We know that.
So I didn't mean right now, I meant if the guidelines change, because I've heard rumors that the CDC and perhaps then the state might follow and change those rules. And if they want to change those rules, they could change the contact tracing rules, right? They can actually do whatever they want, right?
I've heard the same thing coming down about the CDC changing the guidelines, but I've heard that rumor, but I have no evidence to prove that they're going to do that at this time.
Right. So my question was, would it even be helpful to us considering all of the families that are remote? That was sort of my question. And then also, if we were to do that and people were worried, could the adults, could the teachers and the staff, could they remain 6 feet while the students were 3 feet? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, just things to think about. We have to move forward at some point, right? So I just want people to keep it on the table.
I think though too, you also have to factor in the ventilation studies too.
Oh, absolutely.
So they would factor in as well. So I agree. Like if things are progressing and CDC outlines, I mean, that's definitely something that we should reconsider and factor in the ventilation studies at the same time.
That's it.
I have to say, I was very moved by Sue Sheehan's comments. I think they were back in December. I don't even know, it feels like a year ago already, when she spoke during public comment here in our meeting. You know, one of the things that she was talking about was quality. And it's so rare that we have our e-board here with us, our teachers, you know, our teacher representatives. And I know some of the things that you guys have told us sort of anecdotally or offline have been really helpful for me. But, you know, I'm in a privileged seat because I have proximity to you. I didn't know if there were things that maybe some of the teachers could say, you know, as it relates to all of this, you know, the superintendent's report, you know, and what you see happening in the classrooms, you know, anecdotally.
I'll speak up again.
Love you, Becca. Thank you.
Well, I tell my kiddos every day that the best part of my day is seeing them in person, seeing their faces. It has been fabulous. The kids have been great. And you also have to remember, as when we talk about moving closer, it's hard enough for elementary teachers to stay away from their kids. They get boo-boos, they get sad. It's hard to teach from 6 feet away because you're constantly, these are your kids. When they're not with their parents, they're with you and they're yours. And you love them like they're your own. So when they're crying or they're sad, because remember, we're in a pandemic, things are really scary to them. They have sick grandparents, sick people that they know. So when they leave their parents at the door, you have kids that start crying because they're nervous. So one of the goals when you're talking about social emotional is making sure when these kids are with you that they're feeling safe, cared for in their learning. Also during, and I think Superintendent Angelakis said it, the 4 hours and 15 minutes that we're there, they are working non-stop. It is an intensive 4 hours. It's a great 4 hours because we get to be with them. And I'm seeing a lot of progress with kids. Speaking anecdotally, I have 4 kids that are now coming in 4 days a week that weren't before. So I'm getting more kids just personally in my own classroom. So we are doing the best under circumstances in which, let's be very clear, we're in a surging pandemic. So hopefully when vaccines roll out, things will get back to somewhat normal, but we really have to keep reminding ourselves we are in a pandemic. Let's please not forget that.
And I think also to piggyback on Becca, when we read Mr. Schneider's letter or other comment, I think what a lot of parents don't realize is that what we really want is the same thing. We're all dying to get back to what our job was. We loved our jobs. And when my cohort A leaves me on Tuesday, and we've made such great progress on those 2 days of being together in class, and I think, oh, I'm not going to have them back until Monday, it's really hard on the teacher too, because we know how well that they do when we're together. We know it's not the same when we're remote. And we really, at the end of the day, really want the same thing.
Lynn, I don't mean to send this your way, but do the teachers feel like they, if they're noticing something's not working or working particularly well, that you have the voice to change or extend it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's, like Pam has said so many times tonight, we're always having those conversations every day. We're reflecting on what worked and what didn't. it's just unfortunate that, you know, sometimes the things that we want to fix just aren't fixable at this time. And we'll just keep trying, but yes, I do feel like teachers feel like, you know, we can go to our building principals and have those conversations. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Does anybody else want to say anything? Have hand raised, questions, comments?
Well, I would just add that since you mentioned all of us a couple times, I think there's how many of us, 5 or 6, but we all agree with Becca. She's our leader. We love her. She speaks for us all. And we're all working really hard. I've been teaching in Swampscott for 25 years. And with the exception of the intensity that used to happen every June when I held an auction with my students, except for the auction weeks, it's like every week is the auction now. You know, I swear, I work hard all week and then I work at least 4 hours a day each weekend day. There's so much to do. Some of it is extra because we focus more on social and emotional learning. I have more contact with parents than ever before, back and forth with emails with the Swift and Harbor people. And it's all good, but it takes so much time. And I would just address, Suzanne, your question. It's possible. I use every minute of every hour online, but it's possible there are teachers who they get to 50 minutes, they get to 55 minutes. Okay, the lesson is at a good stopping point here. So they maybe stop it, but I swear we're all working so many hours, so many extra hours. I have students who my teaching assistants come before the day begins, before class begins, just to meet with me to help make those days class better, help plan with me. We're doing all kinds of special things this year. So I was just going to let Becca speak for it, but I just want you to know that we're all with her and we all speak for each other and we're pretty unified and trying to do the best we can right now.
Appreciate that. Ms. Huntley?
Hi, I'd just like to say that something that we've never put into the hours when the superintendent was calculating hours and time on learning is the lunch bunches that teachers give up their own lunch. And they have a lunch bunch with new students that are coming in and they invite some other students so that there's some of that social time for them, and have been able to bring in-person learners together with students that are remote learners, and they're doing that on their own time. That's not going into the time, and it's happening regularly certainly across Stanley. And speaking with the other principals, I think it's happening across all of the schools. There are so many extras we're not even tabulating that make a difference. And more often than not, it's to either support someone who's struggling socially, emotionally, or academically. It's extra time that's not being registered. And I see the teachers doing it constantly.
Thank you, Ms. Huntley. I think that's really important to know. Those are the things that slip away when you're just looking at data, but we're all trained to look at data. So it's helpful to know.
I guess I just want to say one thing too, but I know how sad everybody is for how everything is. I'm sad when I see my 4 kids that are home, my son in his room who comes out now 2 hours a day because he's on the computer. And then when he wants his free time, he wants to be on the computer. So we all know, as much as we're all working so hard, we're trying to make the best of this. We know it's not even close to what we were doing before. And it's sad for the teachers. It's sad for the parents. It's sad for the kids. Like we know that, and it's hard to be, I'm sure, for the teachers and for all of us, like we're working so hard, and I've worked harder this year than I've ever worked in my entire life, for sure. This is better. The fall's been better. The spring was the worst experience I think I've ever had in terms of how long I was on Zoom, 8-10 hour days. It was horrible. But to work that hard and still know that, it's still so hard to accomplish what we want to accomplish, So I appreciate how, I'm a parent in the district. I have 4 kids here. I know how the parents feel.
Yeah, I think that's the hard balance, is to know that I think probably most people who are sitting on this panel, that, like, the superintendent and I have had conversations about this, and about, when I joined the school board and why, and I said, I like, if you're not fighting for your kids, what are you fighting for? That's what we're all doing. And I think that there is just so much loss over these last 10 months. And it's not letting up. So I want to thank everybody who's here tonight, and I appreciate that you all signed on in support of the superintendent and what she was saying. And I know that you played a big part in her prep work.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, please, and then we'll move on to the next.
And I see that LaToya is here tonight, and her eyes just open, and it's awesome to see her. But I was just kind of curious how the Medco program is. Sorry to put you on the spot, LaToya.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. I mean, I've said it before. I'll say it again. And I've said it in leadership. This pandemic has really shed light on the inequities that communities of color face. And in terms of just all around, in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, in terms of all around just everything that people need to survive, communities of color are really suffering. So I'll start with there. I think that our families are extremely resilient. The way that they've pulled together for each other is quite amazing. In the instances that I do go into Boston and I do get to see them from 6 feet away with masks on, they really miss school. They miss their friends. They miss their teachers. But they also are aware that we are in a pandemic, and the responsibility that I've seen from them over the past 10 almost a year, 10 months to a year is crazy. They've grown up in ways that I don't think that I never thought would have been possible. And while they are struggling social emotionally in some ways, they're appreciating being home in their city. So, I'm seeing differences across the board in terms of development, but they're struggling the same way as all of our kids are. I think it's a little bit easier them being home with the surge of media incidents, in terms of the killings of unarmed Black people, or even what happened at the Capitol last week. I think it's easier for them to be home in their safe space rather than coming to school and worrying about, what are my peers going to say, or what is somebody going to say. So in some ways, I think being home for them has been cathartic, but also therapeutic. But they definitely, they're missing their friends, they're missing the traditions, they're missing the school experience, and missing their teachers as well. So, we're gonna keep rolling through. We still have affinity groups that are going and kicking. I make an effort to see them a few times a week. I just hired a new tutor, and we're also going, and her name is Stephanie Allen, and she was actually a former Metco student in Concord, Carlisle. So we're really excited to bring her on board, along with Temi Tope Bailey, who has been working with our program since the beginning of the year. So I believe that with these two capable, energetic tutors, we can get students to where they need to be, along with the supplemental tutoring that is happening in Boston. So it's tough. It's tough on all of us, but I think, you know, we're all just doing the best that we can, including the students, you know, our families, and shout out to the teachers, because a lot of you guys are, you know, the best part of their day.
Thanks, Latoya.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for participating in that. That was went a little bit longer than I thought, but then not really. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Superintendent. I know there's more on your.
There is. We have a brand new director of human resources, and I had invited him to attend tonight, but something came up, and he will be at our next January school committee meeting for introductions. I'm going to request that the 2019-2020 North Shore Education Consortium annual report be moved to the 27th. And with that, I spoke about the Metco retreat I attended and this fantastic video that was shared. And I've invited Latoya here tonight to give us an introduction to this video. It's something that we'd like to share with the district staff and really start figuring out, as we do our equity audit, you know, a roadmap to creating a more welcoming, inclusive environment here. But I will turn it over to Ms. Ogunbona again to introduce this this video.
Thank you, Superintendent Angelakis. As Pam stated, me, Pam, and Martha attended the Metco Leadership Retreat on December 4th. And we, on top of, you know, an engaging session and workshops, we also were able to see the premiere of this wonderfully produced video, essentially discussing the history of how busing and how Metco came into existence. I've been sharing it amongst leadership and sharing it with our students, because I think that our students, our Metco students, sometimes don't even know why they're doing this. I've started sharing it with them, and I've shared it in SOCA as well. Diversify Our Narrative, which is another affinity group in Swampscott, youth-led. They've been attending our SOCA meetings, and they're trying to figure out how to collaborate with SOCA to get this disseminated to the student body and the larger community, so that everybody can have an understanding of what the program is and how it is beneficial, not just for students coming from Boston, but for students and faculty and the whole Swampscott community, and really every community that is a host community for Metco. So that being said, in the spirit of, you know, Swampscott moving in the direction of anti-racist work, you know, ingratiating this information, this history into the curriculum, and being honest about our truths and our past, we wanted to present this video. So I really hope you guys enjoy it.
Suzanne, can you click on the link in the agenda and it pops up? I can't share my screen.
Letter C, correct?
Letter C, yes.
I'm trying, I'm getting it. And I'll share my screen so you guys can see it.
Yes, please. It is about 20-25 minutes, so.
I watched it today, it was awesome.
Refill your water.
Ms. O, is this something that we should share with our selectmen and have them share out more broadly with the town, do you think?
Absolutely.
For sure. You know what else I was thinking? It's so awesome. These high schoolers are awesome, but it'd be so great to like have a version of this like produced for the elementary school kids and the middle school kids as well. That's sort of, it's really great. All right, I'm gonna play it.
Back to Metco Inc. And I'm sure that they're already.
Yeah, I'm sure they're doing it right. Wait, is it working?
The presentation
Guys, share your screen.
created by 8 high school students who are part of the Metco program, the largest voluntary school desegregation program in the United States. This group of young scholars
Suzanne, it's not sharing.
At 10 schools in Europe.
I'm watching it. Hold on.
Get the report.
Share screen. All right.
Thank you.
Great.
By Towns, Lexi was created by 8 high school students who are part of the METCO program, the largest voluntary school desegregation program in the United States. This group of young scholars live in Boston, but attend schools in nearby towns, Lexington, Natick, Newton, Wayland, and Wellesley. We at the headquarters office of METCO selected and hired them to be researchers and storytellers to uncover the history of Boston's Black activists who fought for educational equity. Their ultimate goal, to share that knowledge with their classmates and teachers, and to reveal some of the people and movements that aren't taught in the history books, including the beginnings of METCO itself. When these 8 students were hired for this internship, the final project was going to be a physical tour of the real places where the story of activism and organizing took place in Boston neighborhoods. Halfway through the year, though, the pandemic struck. So now they have adapted their presentation to a virtual format. We can't be together physically, but we invite you to imagine you are traveling with these young people through time and space.
Welcome to the METCO Educational Activism Tour. This tour will hopefully not only enlighten you, but teach you about educational activism that happened in Boston.
During this 4-month research project, we have been studying the inequalities of the Boston school system and how METCO came to be. Though many of us have been in the METCO program for a substantial amount of time, along this journey of research, we have been able to learn a lot about the rich history of the METCO program.
You will learn about the educational activism during the 1950s to present day, and all the major and minor people and events that have gotten us to where we are within the educational system.
We realized that there was a lot that we did not know about the program, which is why we believe it's important to share it with you all today.
Hope you enjoy the tour.
Every student, no matter skin color or socioeconomic status, has a right to quality education. Unfortunately, we are now 54 years post the original establishment of METCO, and education inequality is still an ongoing problem in Boston and in many other cities as well.
But if we want to dig in about why Boston public schools are so far behind suburban schools, we would have to talk about redlining in Boston. If you don't know what redlining is, it's basically banks that cut up Boston into colored zones, which indicate whether if they will do business with you based on the colored zone you live in. Green and blue zones were predominantly white neighborhoods, and red and yellow zones were predominantly Black neighborhoods. So if you lived in a green or blue zone, banks would happily do business with you. But if you lived in a red or yellow zone, they wouldn't help you out. That being said, basically, banks saw Black people as liabilities.
Suzanne, you muted it.
We lost audio.
Suzanne, we can't hear it.
Can you hear it now?
So at the end of the day, it was about the color of your skin,
Can you hear it?
not if you could pay back your loan. This is the main reason why we still have segregated towns and schools. So how are people of color supposed to get a better education if we can't even live in the towns that have those resources?
Redlining was not the only system to move wealth from Black people to white people. After World War II, government programs like the GI Bill gave generous subsidies to white people who would move out of the cities to buy new homes in the suburbs. Their Black counterparts would not be offered the same, as racism was built into these deals. The development of Route 128, America's technology highway, was part of this pattern too. So, the city of Boston and its suburbs have been linked for more than a century in a cycle of exploitation that many of its residents did not fully understand. Those in the city saw what came to be called white flight and watched as the tax base and services were drained from the places they called home. A nurse and community organizer named Ruth Batson described what was going on in Roxbury.
Life is so hard for Black people. Why do we get treated without respect?
I thought it was supposed to be better with slavery being over, but that is not the case. Me and my family just wanted to move into a nice apartment where some white people used to live. When we arrived, our white neighbors said nothing but nasty slurs and cursed us, and within days they had packed up and moved, as if we were some sort of virus. We did not think much of it, but soon the rent that was priced at $60 had gone up to $120 out of nowhere with no warning. We tried to contact the landlord, but he would not compromise. We have to go to the welfare offices to ask for more money so we can support ourselves. When we paid the rent in full, I'll never forget the way the landlord's eyes widened. He had started questioning us and asking, "How did you get the money?" Which goes to show he was just trying to get a reason to evict us. But we noticed nothing was getting done to improve the conditions of our building itself. The lawn was not mowed, holes and cracks started to erode the walls, and our water stopped being hot, which was a real red flag. We tried getting help with our issues to no avail. The only time the landlord came was to collect the money, and when he came this time, he said the rent was $140. It was either pay or get kicked out. Next thing you know, we were in a loop of asking the welfare offices for money, but at the same time, our rent would rise out of our reach. I would later go around to different neighborhood apartments, and there seemed to be a trend of Black people not being able to pay the rent whilst they live in a rundown apartment. The system the landlords have come up with to keep us down has gone on for long enough, and something needs to be done. For my fellow Blacks, can I even sleep in peace because of the uncertainty of what the white landlord will try to pull tomorrow? I will take a stand if no one else will.
During the early 1960s, the school committee failed to acknowledge the segregation that was going on in the BPS system. The amount spent per pupil in schools were different depending on where a child went to school and the color of their skin. A child could go to a school right next to a white school and they would have significantly fewer resources than the school next door. As you can see in the pictures with the white students, they have desks, chairs, and most likely school supplies. Black students lacked paper, desks, and pencils. One teacher at a school for Black children reported that she had to recollect the pencils at the end of the day to be sure that she had some for the next day.
In 1963, African American parents made demands to the Boston School Committee about their students' poor quality of education.
With growing public awareness of school issues in the summer of 1963, legislation was proposed for a racial imbalance law to be set in place.
Seizing on the momentum generated by the filing of the Racial Imbalance Bill by state legislator Royal Bowling, Boston's activists made their move to confront the city. Ruth Batson was now the chair of the Education Committee of the Boston branch of the NAACP alongside Thomas Atkins. On June 11th, they got on the agenda of the Boston School Committee. Ruth Batson presented a list of 14 demands, starting with a public acknowledgement of the existence of de facto segregation in the Boston public school system. The school committee, chaired by Louise Day Hicks, continued to deny even this first point. But the activists had organized for this moment. One group picketed and held sit-ins at the school committee building, while a much larger mobilization got underway, a giant school boycott, the Stay Out for Freedom. But they weren't just school walkouts. They created something just for them, freedom schools.
The idea of freedom schools was first established during the June 18th School Stay Out Day. The goal of Freedom School is to develop a group of committed citizens who are aware of the need for social change and are prepared to act to effect it. Our purpose is to create a vehicle for organized action by those who are committed to the freedom movement, initiate and deepen the commitment of the participants. This was to be an ongoing institution and instruct both Black and white youth to participate in the aspects of nonviolence, Negro history, the freedom movement, and civic responsibility. The school will accommodate 1,000 persons in 3 age groupings, adult, high school, and junior high school, with a faculty of 120 professional teachers, teenagers, and local residents to instruct these classes for those who wanted to broaden their knowledge and understanding in these areas.
Even after the boycotts, the segregation was still happening right in front of them, and they did nothing.
Later, Governor Peabody appointed a Racial Imbalance Advisory Commission, asking the committee to investigate the racial imbalance in the public schools of Massachusetts. The commission was to determine whether racial imbalance exists, and if so, to determine whether racial imbalance is educationally harmful. This commission found that there were 55 racially imbalanced schools in the Massachusetts school system, and 45 of them were in the Boston area alone. The group proposed busing as a solution. At first, Louise Day Hicks and the Boston School Committee refused to even discuss the idea of busing. Ultimately, the State Board of Education ordered the school committee to alter its open enrollment policy in order to achieve racial balance.
A major problem with the schools for Black students was the fact that they were overcrowded. To fix this problem, the school committee instituted double sessions. Double sessions would reduce the overcrowded schools where one set of students would have class early in the day and the other students would have class in the afternoon. The Black students were no longer to get the same education that white students received because their days were cut short due to double sessions. Ellen Jackson was a Black parent of 4 who was done waiting for a higher up to do something. She took matters into her own hands out of anger and frustration. Ellen Jackson and Elizabeth Johnson created a program called Operation Exodus. The plan was to move Black students from Roxbury to better school districts outside of Roxbury, where there were majority white students. They began in the fall of 1964 when the students started school. At the beginning, the parents gave the program around $1,000 to 237 students to the schools outside of their own community. At the peak of the program, there was 975 students a part of Exodus, but the program ended in 1968 due to lack of funding.
On December 19, 1964, the Boston branch of the NAACP wrote a letter to Mayor Collins about the disparities between Boston's predominantly white and African-American/Black schools. They sent this letter in hopes that the mayor would be able to do something about the disparities. Mayor Collins had given the school committee ample time to decide what their course of action would be. However, they had come up short-handed in the time allotted. Mayor Collins believed such imbalance deprives children of equality of education, robbing them of their American birthright, and depriving the city and nation of their talents.
The Board of Education wanted Boston to allow busing, and if it was the only solution to bettering balance, and it commanded the city to make a plan or lose funding. Louise Day Hicks reiterates her dismay for busing. I'm appalled by such a recommendation, and I state empathetically that I shall never vote to allow such an unfair and undemocratic action to take place.
In February 1965, the NAACP prepared to file a suit against the School Committee of Boston on behalf of parents who felt as though the schools were inadequate, and they were. However, later that year, a version of Boyling's 1963 bill was signed into law by Governor John Volpe. The bill allowed the withholding of state and federal funding from schools that failed to comply with its measures to end segregation. After the passing of the Racial Imbalance Act, a group of some 300 priests, rabbis, and other religious leaders rallied in front of St. Paul's Cathedral, 138 Tremont Street, to support the passage of the bill.
Surprisingly, if you wanted to get the best education in Massachusetts, a suburban school was the way to go. Why are they superior, you may ask? Because they can afford to give a proper education. If schools get their funding from income taxes and property taxes, it's quite obvious that neighborhoods with higher taxes is most likely to have the better schools because they have the most money. And yes, most of those schools are located in suburban towns with mostly white residents. In Brookline, the amount spent per pupil in the 1960s was $544. The amount spent per pupil in Boston was $364. This $114 difference between urban and suburban schools is the reason why suburban schools are considered more superior than an urban school. White schools in suburban towns are newer with better educational opportunities, while kids of color are lacking basic supplies to read at the grade level they're in. City kids were statistically most likely to fall behind a grade level or 2 in reading once they reached the 6th grade.
Urban and suburban rights groups got together to protest these conditions. The Massachusetts Federation of Fair Housing and Equal Rights was interested in this, and they sponsored a meeting for more than 12 suburban school districts to explore ways to create some type of program. This led to much more meetings, leading to the creation of METCO. The MECO program, established in 1966, was an attempt to bring equal educational opportunity to urban students and begin to racially integrate suburban schools. On September 6, 1966, 220 MECO students took their first bus ride to 28 schools in 7 suburban districts: Braintree, Lincoln, Arlington, Brookline, Lexington, Newton, and Wellesley, and with Joseph Killary as the first executive director. Killary wasn't executive director for long. Ruth Batson then became executive director from 1967 to 1970.
MECO's budget was $100,000 in 1967, but in 1968, it went down to $500,000, which is a huge financial jump. Ever since, MECO's budget kept growing and growing. In 1971, Ruth Batson got a letter saying that suburban schools are starting to push down the cost per pupil so MECO can afford to start bringing more kids because they have more money to work with.
On June 21st, 1974, Garrity ruled that the Boston School Committee was purposely maintaining 2 separate school systems. Garrity ordered citywide busing for the upcoming school year. Students from Dorchester and South Boston were going to be bused to opposing neighborhoods to go to school. On September 9th, people who opposed busing marched to the federal building to get anti-busing legislation and to protest Senator Edward Kennedy's support of desegregation. For the white students entering Dorchester schools, it was easy and simple for them. But for the Black students, it was anything but easy. In South Boston, the students were greeted by royal protesters and violence and had to be escorted in and out of school by police. Many South Boston parents didn't want their kids to attend school with Black students. White students and parents boycotted the schools. At the height of the boycott, more than 50% of white students didn't attend schools.
During this time period, violence was a common theme between the white and Black communities, whether it happened because of someone harassing a person of the opposite race on the streets or a group ambushing another in protest. A major place where these incidents occurred was the integrated schools. Teens will often fight over little occurrences, whether it was a slight push in the halls or a glance in the bathroom.
Almost a year after Black high school students have started to integrate into predominantly white schools, racial tensions were as high as ever. With all the backlash that Black students were facing, it seemed like the students were more focused on their safety than the integration and education they're supposed to be receiving. Garrity wanted to make sure all Boston public schools are meeting the racial imbalance law. Judge Garrity had implemented this integration plan, but was not going as he'd hoped. A major problem was the bus trip. When the buses got into these predominantly white neighborhoods, anti-integration supporters throw rocks at buses, not let students get in or off the bus, and much more. In September 1975, the start of the new school year, Judge Garrity had a new plan. This plan was for schools to initiate maximum integration with minimum busing. Garrity thought he would close a huge gap filled with violence. This was a proposal. It was never implemented.
Jean McGuire was a teacher, activist, and leader. She had a major role in Boston's education activism. Miss McGuire was born and raised in Boston and taught in BPS schools, so she knew firsthand the discrimination that was going on in the schools. During her time at BPS, she was the first Black pupil adjustment counselor. After her time in Boston Public Schools, she went to help create and eventually become the executive director for MECO for 43 years. She wanted non-white students to have the materials and proper teachers to learn and become as successful as their white counterparts. In order to make the goal she wanted a reality, she decided to run for the Boston School Committee and became the first African-American woman to be elected as a committee member. She fought for Black students, equal opportunity, and representation.
South Boston High School was one of the first schools in Boston that became integrated, which made it a hotspot for fights. One specific incident within that high school was on March 6, 1979, when a brawl occurred. Not only were the students attacked, but also teachers were attacked. It involved 17 students of both Black and white descent and 2 teachers who began to fight on all floors of the school. White students would vandalize Black teachers' cars as well as harass them on the street. One Southie teacher was threatened with a gun placed against his head by 2 white students. But every incident didn't occur at Southie or just the high school in general. There were also cases that occurred in public places. Nearby South Boston High is Carson Beach. The NAACP planned some of their gatherings there, such as their picnic or their meeting. However, they both ended with the group getting ambushed by white protesters, which led to multiple beach and ocean brawls and horses ending up on the beach somehow. It was quite the public disturbance, and it shows how far people go to get their point across, even if it involved violence.
For 10 years, Boston's Black children risked verbal and physical attack just for going to school. Once there, they seized the opportunities to learn and grow, with white groups like ROAR cementing a narrative of forced busing that has all but blocked out the memory of decades of activism by Black Bostonians. Since then, the Boston Public Schools have changed in significant ways, but despite all this effort, schools are even more segregated now than they were in the 1950s, and METCO has endured. After Dr. Jean McGuire retired, Millie Arbaje Thomas took the helm as president and CEO in 2018. She has focused on modernizing the application process for families, engaging suburban communities to live up to METCO's potential, and telling the story of METCO and the struggle for racial equity in education.
As of 2019, the MECO budget is $24.2 million.
With that money, the program is able to put students into these schools, give all the district's buses. Students are able to attend events that help them be enriched in their cultures and others.
But the money we get from the state isn't always enough to provide all the funds we need to keep running as a program.
As of the 2019 school year, MECO now has 3,100 students participating in 33 suburban school districts. Many of these districts have up to 100 plus students, but others have less than 10. No matter how big or small the MECO student population is in a district, the students who participate are still making a huge difference in their communities, and both parties are getting experiences they might not have been able to receive otherwise.
I have been in the MECO program since first grade. As I conclude my 12-year journey, I can definitely say that this experience has been a roller coaster, but nonetheless, I'm grateful for the quality resources granted to me and for the many people I have met along the way. Without leaders such as Jean McGuire and Luke Batson, I wouldn't have been able to have access to the quality education that I have in Wayland. MECO is an exceptional program, but it only solves part of the problem. What about the thousands of other students who aren't in the program? How will the school system compensate these students for the lack of adequate resources? These are questions that we must all take time to ponder. MECO wasn't supposed to be the end goal, but we can't use it as a crutch to shy away from the real issue at hand.
No matter where you live or the color of your skin, you should be able to access the same quality of education all throughout Massachusetts and the world. If we wanted to, we have the resources to provide a proper education for the kids of color in the city, but we choose to invest where we see most valuable. We put white kids as a priority and kids of color on the back burner.
Inequity and segregation have prevailed for too long in Boston schools. I vow to continue to advocate for equity and equality in the school system. It is my responsibility to take what I've learned while being in MECO and become a beacon of light for my community.
My brown skin is my strength and also my weakness. It's resistant and fair, not inferior, but equal. I wasn't aware that our skin color mattered in education. Why is it that the money falls after another and not the other? Bigger classrooms and better materials seems put together a job well done, yet the other can't get access to a full curriculum. When our melanin kings and queens deemed for something more, Judge Garrity granted that success while Louise Day Hicks approached us with roar. Busing was said to be taking away their rights, forgetting that our rights were never taken into account. Black scholars who just want to attend school without the need of rocks being thrown as they pull into the school that's supposed to be welcoming, not presented as if it was their own, and we didn't belong. When did race matter in education? Parents didn't want their children here and wouldn't let us there. More diversity was needed within these walls. Why is that a better education couldn't be for all?
was awesome.
Wow.
So if anybody wants to rewatch that video or share it, or even maybe watch it with your students who are in the district, you can find the video on Metco Inc.'s website. Also, I believe it should be somewhere on the district website as well as the Swampscott Metco website. So if it's not up in an accessible place, which I believe it's right on the district website page, I think it's worth a second watch. You might see some places that you've seen in Boston before. And there's a lot of historical significance in this video, and they did such a great job synchronizing it into 20 minutes, but there's so much more to learn, and it's especially important that we see these images, hear these stories, so that we can know the direction that we want to go in moving forward.
And we felt that we should start here at the top, and now we'll create a roadmap for what to do next. And the first step is that equity audit, and that starts with the leadership team. Thank you so much, LaToya.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think especially after the week that we've all just been through, the 2 weeks that we've just been through, it's a terrible time, and it just drives home why we are doing what we're doing. And thank you.
That concludes my superintendent section of the agenda.
Okay. So then next up, we have a budget discussion with Ms. Seibert.
I didn't prepare anything for this. I thought it was just a general question and answer, kind of.
Well, so sorry to put you on the spot.
Okay.
That's definitely unintentional. I think, what the superintendent and I talked about was really just sort of a really high level of sort of where we are, the conversations that you've been having with town hall and finance, and I think the big question is like, what's happening, and what do we need to be prepared for ahead of going into budget season?
Sure. No, those are all fair questions, and it is appropriate to recognize that the superintendent, the town administrator, and the town finance team, we have been meeting. I meet weekly with my town finance counterparts. And we're all acutely aware of what's going on. So looking at FY21 and where we are in our current budget year, we have been very fortunate to have had a lot of CARES funds, both for the school department, and the town was very generous with their CARES funds. So we have been able to shift, really the majority of the COVID expenses have been borne by those federal funds that were given to us. On our regular operating budget, we have what the town administrator coined, and I agree with him, we have a revenue problem, not necessarily an expense problem. Our operating budget took into account $100,000 of offsets from extended day program. Well, that's not happening anymore. It took into account a $20,000 offset for rental income. That's not happening. It took into account about 100,000 offset for pre-K tuitions. That's not happening. So it took into account a profitable food service program. That's not happening. So that's about $300,000 of revenue that is not there anymore, and has to be borne by the operating budget potentially. Sorry, Lily's coming in now that I'm talking. So those losses of revenues are offset by expense reductions. We're not tracking to the substitute expense line that we would have ordinarily. We're probably going to save close to $200,000 on substitute expenses, because we're allowing teachers to teach remotely if they need to, and we have that ability to. So where a teacher may have needed to be out for a childcare issue, they can teach remotely. So there are things that are offsetting some of our expenses. We also have had a few out-of-district placements that have happened as a result of the pandemic, where we may have been able to keep a child in district due to some constraints. The family has gone out of district, and that's now a tuition bill that we're settled with. So looking at FY21 with all these different moving pieces and parts, we're still only in January. I still don't have the totality of what the heating season is going to be like. Pray for no snow and pray for a mild winter. I do think that we're tracking probably about $100,000 to $200,000 over budget, but that doesn't mean that we're going to overspend our budget. It means that we'll have to look at, do we not spend as much money in the second half of the year on supplies, which we're tracking down on supplies. My forecast has us spending all of our money on supplies. Are we going to spend $200,000 in supplies K through 12 from now until the end of June? Probably not. Are there other places where we can save money? Absolutely. And do we have the ability to utilize circuit breaker more? Absolutely. And if part of the driver of what's putting us over budget right now is increased in out-of-district placements, then it'll be appropriate to utilize circuit breaker. So I think the message to the school committee and to anyone else who's tuning in is that we will meet our obligation to not exceed our budget for FY21. We have different tools available to us to do that. We also don't know what we're going to get in CARES funding for the second half of the year. And so certainly those funds will be available to us to offset any other expenses that we have. So I think FY21, we're tracking to where we need to be. Obviously I'm mindful of that, and we'll keep an eye on it, but we will not overspend our budget for FY21. So setting the table for FY22, we have added some incremental staff this year that we will keep into next year. We've added some staff this year that were 1 year to help us get through the end of the year. It was not necessarily going to carry into next year. So over the next couple of days, I'll be reviewing staffing budgets with the building leadership, building principals, and determining what our needs are for FY22. And I did hear tonight from one of the school committee members that I think that it was multiple school committee members, that there's a strong sense of we need to figure out what we might need to do in the summer to help with some loss of learning or some catching kids up. And if there are grant opportunities available to help fund that, then Dr. Bacon is fantastic at finding those and applying for those and getting those funds. That's what's funding a lot of what we're doing now with tutoring. I don't know if there will be another summer vacation grant. I would assume there would be, given the climate, but you never know. So we'll figure those things out. But I think it's helpful to know what the committee thinks is important. Obviously, the superintendent and I talk about what she wants to see in the budget for next year. I hope that's helpful. I'll stop talking and allow more questions, more dialogue.
Karen, why don't you go ahead?
I was just going to ask, when do we think we're going to start our committee of the whole meetings on budget topics? This may be more towards John and Ted than Martha, but seems like that should be probably getting started soon.
I would say soon.
Yeah, it should be. I'm not going to lie, I am behind. Our first meeting, the first presentation of the budget to the school committee is still going to happen on January 27th. So I would say committee of the whole meeting probably should try and get one on the books for next week.
I agree. I think, yeah.
I have a question. Ms. Seibert, can we use CARES money for salaries? Is that like, is that one of the things you can use it for?
You absolutely can use it for salaries. We used it for a couple of very strategic positions that were unbudgeted. There were some restrictions on it. So you weren't allowed to just use it for anybody's salary. Early on, it was for an unbudgeted position that was the result of the pandemic.
So like when we're talking about hiring remote teachers, and I know like you guys have been able to like move things around to fund some maybe within the budget, but is that a
Yes, I think remote teachers is a perfect example of something that I would want to use CARES funds or the next round of funding for. And we really haven't been given very much information on what our allocation is going to be. I've seen a couple of different theories on what the funding is going to be. Some people said it was going to be 3.7 times our ESSER grant, which would put it right around $500,000 for Swampscott, which would be fantastic if it's that much. Because there was some discussion that was going to be based along Title I allocations, which ESSER was partially based on Title I. So if it's 3.7 of our ESSER, that'd be great. But we haven't really gotten any guidance from DESI that I've seen. And I certainly have been looking on what our allocation will be.
So money isn't keeping us from hiring these people if we could find them, right?
No, as I said before, we'll figure out how to balance the budget one way or another.
Thanks.
Did I see your hand raised?
One of my questions was what Karen was saying. So I would think John and I would try to touch base maybe tomorrow, and then we can reach out to Maureen and maybe get something going on dates that are good for everyone, for the community of the whole. Martha, as usual, I know you were on the spot there. I do look forward to talking about, I was pleased that there was conversation on the E-rate. Also look to get a capital improvement update, retirements, and everything else that we talk about, but I appreciate your time. I know it's late.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Anybody else? Okay. Ms. Seibert, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Delano and Mr. Giantis, we'll look to hear from you guys next week, or sooner than later, about a meeting next week. Okay, so that brings it to me. I just wanted to talk about our tri-chair, which is, it's funny the way the timing works, because we've got a tri-chair this week, but I haven't reported in yet on the last tri-chair meeting. I think probably most important was my connectivity with Tim Dorsey and the Finance Committee in terms of wanting to set up a timeline not unlike what they requested last year. So I think I'm going to defer to you, Ted and John, and obviously John, particularly since you're new, I'll make the introductions. But I want to get you guys connected with him sooner than later, just to make sure that I know that Karen did that last year. Just to make sure that they're feeling like they've got the information, not at the last minute. I think the lion's share, Ms. Seibert and I talked about this, the lion's share is going to be in Ms. Seibert's court, because she's got the actual data and producing the book. But just for you to be connecting with Tim would be a good thing.
I see Tim in attendance tonight, so.
Yeah. We also spent a fair amount of time in tri-chair talking about, we met with Mr. Casper, talking about facilities, in a broader sense, and just sort of making sure everything is on track. And Mr. Casper gave us a walkthrough, about some more details on the project, which he reported on tonight. And then last but not least, we had a really high level discussion about the Nahant contract. And so this isn't so much tri-chair as it is subcommittee. But the conversations have begun with the next Nahant contract. It's a 5-year contract. We're well ahead of schedule. We're not supposed to, we don't need to close on this until the end of the school year, I believe. And we're making some good progress. When we struck the last 5-year deal with them, it really was a wholesale change in terms of how we billed them, how much they were paying. It increased significantly per student. It leveled out the way that we received payments from them. And we're looking to just make some more progress on that. And as we talked about, I believe at the last meeting, Ms. Seibert's done a lot of work, identifying the issues, the things in our budget that they should be contributing to. And, I know that the talk around town has always been that, they're getting a great bargain, but they're really, their costs have increased pretty significantly, which we're happy about because that comes straight to us. And, I think ultimately important to remember that, these are just a little bit more than 100 kids spread out over 5 grades. If these kids go away, we're not letting any staff go. They're essentially filling empty seats. So, it's a balance of, what's good for them, but also what's good for us. And I think that covers it there. Ted, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about Nahant particularly.
I would say that it was refreshing on many levels. There was great conversation, and just to keep in mind, this is an arrangement I think can span about 3 decades. So I think it works for Nahant, for Swampscott. We have people that reside in each community that have moved back and forth, and I think it's a partnership that's well worth it and beneficial to all. And Martha played a huge role in expediting things.
Yeah, and I will say, I know that the talk around town is always, what a big bargain they're getting, and I think as we don't have final numbers yet, but I'm pretty proud of the last negotiations. So I think that these will go well too. Okay, so next on my agenda is the Chapter 70 Hold Harmless Aid. So I don't know if everybody's had an opportunity to look at this. This is going to be based on something that many of the other districts in our state are doing, and it is. I'm going to read this publicly. It's the resolution to hold harmless aid. That aid is essential and equitable. Whereas, sorry, I have to bump up the size of my font. Okay, whereas the legislature passed the Student Opportunity Act to equalize education funding, and whereas some advocacy groups seeking to implement the act quickly proposed to eliminate the, quote, hold harmless provision of the current law that prevents the reduction of state aid to any city, town, or regional district from the amount of aid from the previous year. And whereas the Swampscott School District, the Swampscott School Committee originally supported the Student Opportunity Act, but with the elimination of the hold harmless provision, we would lose more than, we don't have a dollar amount yet, which we cannot support. And whereas such a loss would have a negative impact on the equitable access to and quality of education in our communities, resulting in a dramatic reduction to services, including but not limited to reduction of staffing levels with corresponding class increases in class sizes at grade levels, potential cuts to elective programs, specials and extracurricular activities, reductions to special education, English language learner and intervention services for our most vulnerable students, with the highest needs. And whereas many public school districts like ours have experienced declining enrollment due to many factors, including the current pandemic, but still have annual inflation of fixed costs and therefore have higher costs per student and less ability to benefit from the economy of scale that is assumed in the foundation budget calculations. And whereas public schools like ours rely heavily on this aid, in part because we are disproportionately impacted by the state's repeated failure to fully fund the subject to appropriation mandates of charter reimbursement, circuit breaker, and homeless student transportation. Therefore, let it be resolved that we, the undersigned, ask DESE and DLS in the strongest possible terms to preserve the hold harmless aid upon implementation of the Student Opportunity Act. Losing hold harmless would have a profound negative impact on the quality and equity of our public schools. Has everybody had a chance to sort of look at this and has anybody seen what other districts are doing? Jane, you're unusually quiet.
No, so this was starting to circulate, I think, before Christmas. I think I saw it on the listserv, but is it still a concern, or didn't the legislature pass something? I can't remember what I read. I mean, I'm all for it because obviously we need that money. And I just thought there was something, DESE didn't say something about this. I feel like I read something recently. Sorry to not know, but
no, I apologize for not knowing either, because I think when Ms. Karen and I talked about this, it wasn't, I didn't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely agree. We should be signing something like this, especially if there's any risk of this happening. But I think there's been talk that this isn't going to happen.
Ms. Seibert, can you chime in? Do you know anything?
I thought, though, I did not know the home harmless position was being even considered being eliminated. I've not heard that. So I can research it certainly, but I haven't seen it buzzing on my listserv. I know that I thought the governor's budget, or the budget that just passed, was looking to implement the Student Opportunity Act over the next 6 years. They realized that this first year was a 7-year implementation according to the governor's first budget. And obviously the pandemic has interrupted that plan, but I thought that the plan was to implement it over the next 6 years, fully implemented over the next 6 years. So I haven't seen it, forgive me.
No worries. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to just consider this a first read, and then we can vote on this at our next meeting after I've had an opportunity to look into this a little bit more. Is right. If you can help me, you're particularly good at these kinds of things.
Yeah, I'll do some research.
Thanks. So that's it from me. And I will turn it over to you for an SBC update.
We had a little hiatus for the month of December and just started meeting again. We are planning to have some conversations with community members as the design team starts to finalize the design. Hoping to talk to neighbors about traffic issues, and then we're hoping to talk to the larger community about site considerations, like people who are interested in, Mrs. Raymond's going to help with this, like handicap accessible playground, and having the Conservancy and the Open Space and Rec Commission help us with visioning some outdoor classrooms and outdoor learning environments and natural plantings, people who are interested in that kind of landscape design with our landscape designer, and some other site considerations. And then we're going to have another additional workshop that's going to talk about the building and the accessibility and the shared community use with the school and how that's going to look and what people want it to look like. So look forward to those the first 2 weeks in February. And then the design team's going to finish designing the building. That's where we're at.
Does anybody have any questions? Comments? Nothing? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to allocate 15 minutes to public comment
Want to do the consent agenda first?
Oh, that would be helpful since that's next up. Thanks. Consent agenda is designed to expedite the handling of routine and miscellaneous businesses of the district. The school committee may adopt the entire consent agenda with one motion. At the request of any committee member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on regular agenda for discussion. Tonight, we've got the two regular session minutes from December 9th of 2020 and a warrant number 2127. I will accept a motion.
Make the motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion or questions?
Nope.
Okay, roll call vote. John, all in favor?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That makes it unanimous. And then we're on to public comment. So, Suzanne, I'm going to ask you to help me out here in terms of, I see two hands go up. So I'm going to call on Mr. Schneider first.
Wait, can I interrupt you, Amy?
Of course.
Are we limiting public comments to 3 minutes? It's getting late. I want to just respect our administrators on
Yes,
here.
thank you for reminding me of that. So we're going to limit it to 3 minutes. We ask people to please be mindful of the time. I will give you a gentle reminder at 3 minutes, but if it goes much further than that, we're going to mute you and move along just because it's 10 o'clock at night.
I'm going to mute.
Okay, I'm allowing Mr. Schneider to talk. If you unmute.
Is this good now?
We can hear you, yes.
Great. Good evening, my name is Eric Schneider, and I'm a town meeting member for Precinct 5 and a parent of one Swampscott Elementary School student and two future elementary school students. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee this evening. I would like to use this time to share one parent's perspective on learning in this pandemic to hopefully provide some background to the committee on the motivation for all our letters. Elementary school parents are the ones that sit next to our students to help them navigate their daily schedule, sit next to them when they do their asynchronous work assignments. As the superintendent stated tonight, our youngest learners need engagement to learn. And at least in our experience, we cannot praise the Swampscott teachers enough, and despite the limited instruction time, our students are learning and progressing. But with increased parent involvement in education comes naturally higher scrutiny on school department decisions and their effect on their children. We acknowledge that the pandemic presents the town and its schools with unprecedented challenges, both in increased demand and limited resources. We also know that the current situation requires the school district and the school committee to make some very hard choices, ones that will not make everybody happy. That said, from our perspective, many of the decisions so far on the learning schedule and the amount of instruction time the district provides elementary school students was made in a black box. We were presented with a schedule, and that due to the circumstances, nothing more can be done. The absence of information and disclosure by the school department on what factors went into the decisions was very frustrating. Parents are dissatisfied with the situation. I know of several parents who have left or are considering leaving the public school district, and I know of others who are considering moving away from Swampscott. Today's presentation and the discussion and questions by the school committee, in my mind, goes a long way to lift the veil and provide detailed information to parents. Thank you. I look forward to future school committee meetings and receiving similarly detailed and informative presentations. And I wanted to close with, you should know that if you are ever constrained in your decisions or cannot provide a service because of a lack of funds in your budget, know that parents will gladly partner with you and petition the town for more money or support you otherwise at town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. I appreciate that. Always succinct. Next up, I see Ms. Zoll. I'm allowing you, I just unmuted you, so just unmute yourself.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to offer comments this evening. I'm Keiko Zoll, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6, and Stanley School Parent. I'm going to motor through this as fast as I can. First, I want to thank Superintendent Angelakis for her robust presentation in response to our letter signed by 103 parents, and for the continuing work the district is engaging in to press on through the pandemic. I am ecstatic to see mention of expanded summer learning programs, discussions around tutoring relative to remediation, and I'm really eager to learn more. Next, I want to acknowledge the teachers that were on this meeting. I don't know if they're still on. I know how hard they're working given the constraints right now, and I just want to thank them for their work. Our letter's focus on live instruction and our request for more live SLT was never a critique of our children's educators, and I just wanted to be really clear about that. When it comes to live SLT, Swampscott is not the worst, but the data presented by Desi speaks for itself, and we can't let the enormity or the complexity of the challenge before us overwhelm the district's commitment to continuous improvement in its mission. We mustn't settle for merely compliance, because compliance didn't net us a National Blue Ribbon high school. And in absence of guidance from the state, and it is a big absence, we need to forge boldly ahead despite them. When Chair O'Connor opened tonight, she cautioned that we must avoid the trap of one-size-fits-all solutions or the temptation to compare ourselves to other districts, while emphasizing that we have to consider everything, quote, under these circumstances. And I agree, but where I disagree is the characterization that these circumstances are limitations. I see them as opportunities, and the district must rise above the challenge of these circumstances for the benefit of our students. We're well past the point of all hands on deck relative to capacity to get this work done. It's all brains on deck time to be as innovative, creative, and resourceful as possible. You know, it's about picking up the phone, it's about firing up Google and collaborating with others directly about how they're making it work in their communities, and that best practices need not be limited by locality. It's really easy to blame facilities, dollars, people, or time, but there are plenty of other districts with a lot less resources that have managed to make this work. So this is about nimbleness. This is about strategy. This is about leadership. Navigating COVID is very much an exercise in building the plane while you're flying it, but we have to remember what the flight plan is. Our destination always has been, COVID or otherwise, promote academic excellence for all students. I applaud Superintendent Angelakis for reaffirming the district's commitment to that mission. Tonight, I do respectfully disagree that the district is delivering on that promise, especially for our youngest learners. I eagerly await the presentation of mid-year assessment data. In closing, everybody here just wants what's best for our kids, and it is unbelievably hard right now. I'm asking leadership and the school committee to embrace a mindset of family partnership to make that happen. Like, we're not your enemies. Yes, it starts with accountability for what hasn't worked, but it continues in transparency about how we move forward strategically, nimbly, and with urgency. I'm very, very encouraged by what I've seen tonight. And I'm going to continue to hold our district and this committee accountable for the excellence we promise for our students. Keep it up, and let's keep it going. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zoll.
I don't see any other hands, Amy.
All right. Okay, so shorter than I would have anticipated, but 10 o'clock nonetheless. So with that, I am going to entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
That was quick. Do I have do I have a second?
I'll second.
I got you again.
Karen is seconding it. Roll call vote. Ted?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
And I am a yes, so that is a unanimous. We are adjourned at 10 o'clock exactly.
Woohoo!
Nice
Thank
job,
you
everyone.
all. Thank you for whoever hung on for 3 hours. It is yeoman's work. So thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Night.
Night.